The wind off the western plains was sharper than Jon remembered, as though the very sky had taken to mocking him for his choice. A month had passed since the Raven arrived, carrying Winter's first announcement and his father's death. Robb had departed with his great host to seek vengeance in the south, and Sansa had ridden northward alongside Lady Catelyn, bound for the Vale. The crypts were quieter now, an echoing chamber of whispering stones, yet Jon remained above, pacing the battlements as dusk settled. Shadows pooled in the corners of the courtyards, and the torches lining the curtain walls flickered like distant souls, quivering against the coming night. He had intended to depart with them all, to stand beside his sister and his brother. What had kept him? A promise to Ned, a fractured oath to the Night's Watch, and the silent whisper of a half-truth lodged in his throat. "You know nothing, Jon Snow," Ygritte had said once, and he wished his ignorance had been as simple as hers, for then he would not know the weight of promises unfulfilled. Below, the laws of the North were different. There was no king's justice to stand between life and death. No hand of the king to pass sentence on the innocent. Here was the old world, forged in ice and bone, ruled by honor and the sharp clang of steel. His choice was made not on the plains of the Trident, nor in the black halls of the Eyrie, but here, in the drawn silence of his birthright. He would stay at Winterfell, guard the north, and wait. In the Hall of Masks, 20 banners hung, each one crowned with the dire wolf of House Stark. Robb's banner of the young wolf, was gone, hoisted instead on the river road, proclaiming his rebellion. Ned's banner remained, heavy with mourning. Jon laid his own wolf pelt before it, and reached back to touch the weather-beaten ivory of his fallen father's helm. His hand trembled, not from the cold, but from grief and indecision. A soft rustle behind him startled him. Sir Rodrik Cassel stepped from the shadows, greatsword strapped across his back, the battle of the fist scar still visible on his cheek. "My lord," he said, voice low, "it is nearly dark. You should find rest." Jon nodded, turning away from the altar. "I cannot sleep," he admitted. "Not yet." Rodrik inclined his head. "There will be time enough for mourning after your brother's banners return bearing the heads of traitors. For now there are tasks to set in motion." Jon followed him through the dim corridors, past suits of armor and ancestral tapestries. The castle's heartbeat thudded around them. The patter of boots on flagstones, the murmur of servants in distant chambers, the muffled laughter of boys playing near the kitchens. Life went on, unheeding of grief. "In a fortnight," Rodrik said as they emerged onto the courtyard. "The first student arrives. Young recruits from the smaller houses. You must oversee their training, ensure their oaths are sincere." Jon paused. "I am no teacher, Sir Rodrik." "You are the son of Lord Eddard Stark," the Master-at-Arms replied. "Your blood carries more weight than any tutor's lecture." Jon glanced at the training yard, where recruits clashed dull blades under the scrutiny of veteran knights. A boy no older than 10, lean, with dark hair and haunted eyes, wavered in his stance, only to be corrected by an elder with a harsh word. The boy stumbled, shame flooding his cheeks. Jon's gaze lingered, his own first duel with Sir Rodrik flickered back. Hands unsteady, fear coiled like a snake in his gut, and the sturdy sword pressing against his neck. They were not all sons of lords. Many were the sons of farmers and blacksmiths, seeking honor beyond the plow. Yet the North was no stranger to hardship. Here, the strong went south to see war, but the weak remained behind to guard hearth and harvest. Now Jon would lead them. "You speak as though your father is gone," Rodrik said. "I will not have his hall ghosted by silence." Jon nodded again, the knot in his chest tightening. "I will try." "Good." Rodrik turned on his heel and strode away. Jon watched his retreating back until it vanished into the gloom. Alone once more, he crossed to the stable, where Ghost greeted him with a silent nuzzle. The dire wolf's eyes glimmered like opals in the torchlight. Jon ran his fingers through the white fur, feeling the familiar warmth. His boyhood companion had grown to his full size in these years, and there was comfort in that constancy. Ghost, unlike his human kin, refused to leave his side. He had stayed too, bound by blood and loyalty. Jon led Ghost from the stable and through the yard toward the Godswood. The heart tree was silent, its weirwood leaves rattling in the breeze. Beneath its branches lay the old god's sanctuary, a circle of stone pavers worn smooth by time and prayer. He took a place on the nearest bench and sat, ghost curled at his feet. He closed his eyes, imprinting the feel of the bark against his fingertips. It smelled of wet earth and pale wood shavings. In the valley of Winterfell, winter's breath came first, cutting through damp stone and pine. Jon exhaled, matching his breath to the rhythm of the wind. A memory took shape, Ned's hand on his shoulder, teaching him the words of the oath. I am the sword in the darkness. I am the watcher on the walls. The night Jon had sworn, the torches lining the battlements had glowed like fireflies, and Ned's proud gaze had burned brighter than all of them. When he'd finished, Ned had smiled, a fleeting thing, and leaned down to embrace him. You're my son, Jon Snow, he'd said. Blood of my blood. Jon's chest ached. He opened his eyes, staring at the blood-red leaves overhead. He had never considered staying home. The watch was his destiny, he had thought. His punishment, his deliverance, the only path open to a bastard born. But destiny's threads could unravel in an instant. Summerhall had burned, and the great spring had withered. Winterfell stood, battered by frost and legend, but still a bastion. There was work to be done here. He rose, boots crunching on the gravel. Ghost followed. Silent as a wraith, together they walked back toward the castle. Torches glared, windows glowed, doors creaked on ancient hinges. Each step echoed against the stone, a solitary drum signaling defiance against the cold. In the solar, Maester Luwin bent over a table, strewn with parchment. His spectacles glinted beneath unkempt brows as he scribbled notes by candlelight. Jon paused at the threshold. The Maester glanced up. My lord, Luwin said softly, you should rest. Jon gestured at the scattered scrolls. Reports from the marches? Luwin set down his quill and motioned him in. Indeed, the clans have grown restless since word of Lord Eddard's fate reached beyond these walls. I have letters from Great Jon Umber and from the Tallhearts. Both urge caution. Jon approached, studying the wax seals of Adair and Tallheart. Great Jon speaks of mustering his men. He fears raiders will take advantage of our weakness. Mentor and the Tallhearts warn that wildling bands have been seen probing near the Sheepshead Hills. They have taken 2 villages already. Jon's jaw tightened. The wall was far to the north, but no line of stone or steel could bar the truth. Winter was coming, but of that there could be no doubt. We must send riders to Storm's End, he said. Warn Lord Baratheon that his banners are needed here, south of the wall. Luwin's fingers hovered above a fresh sheet. I will prepare the letters. Jon shook his head. No, Tyne. I will ride. The Maester's eyes widened. You, my lord? I am the lord here now. Robb has his war to wage, and Bran cannot yet walk. The children need me, and so does Catelyn. Luwin hesitated, then bowed. At once. Jon mounted Silverstream, his courser, and bracketed the letters in a waterproof case. Ghost padded alongside. Silent as judgment. They left through the ice gate at dawn. The wind had settled, leaving a brittle clarity. Snow lay in drifting waves where the wind had piled it against the outer walls. A pale sun rose, burning through silver clouds, and lit the banners of House Stark in a halo of frost. He spurred Silverstream toward the Roserad, where beggars trailed after his party. Their hands were outstretched, their eyes hollow. Mercy, my lord, one rasped. Mercy. Jon glanced back at them. Heart constricting. Mercy for them, and mercy for him. Mercy for all, if it could be had. But mercy could not warm a village eaten by wolves, or heal the wound of a father's death. He tapped his heels to the mare's flank, signaling Grey Tim, the head rider, to fall in. They set out in silence, the castle receding behind them, a fortress swallowed by early winter's haze. Jon felt a strange calm. He was not running away, but riding toward a purpose. A different oath must be sworn, not in the cold halls of the Watch, but in the open road. It would be an oath to the living, to the north, and to the hope that the winter would not break them. The horse beneath him was steady, Ghost's quiet presence a tether to the past. He breathed the chill air, bracing himself. The journey south to Storm's End would be long and fraught, but there was more to do before he set forth. Winterfell needed a protector, a voice, a heart to hold the North together. In that realization, Jon Snow found his nameless destiny at last. Not as a brother of the Night's Watch, nor as a commander of rebels, but as the silent guardian of the ancient castle, a wolf blooded by loss but unbowed by grief. He did not turn his head as the walls vanished behind a curtain of mist. His gaze remained fixed on the path ahead, a ribbon of dust and stone, threading through the blood-red leaves of autumn. There would be time for grief, when his duty was done. For now, he would ride. The North waited, and Jon Snow would not leave it unguarded. Kay. Dao. Ayin. Juan. Jon's escort crested the low knoll, overlooking the tumbling expanse of the Barrowlands, just as the sun slipped behind gray clouds, casting the hills in bruised shadows. The horses paused, nostrils flaring to catch the scent of distant hearthfires and the iron tang of winter on the wind. Jon sat tall in his saddle, the weight of his decisions as palpable as the sword at his hip. Ghost walked beside him, every muscle rippling under white fur, eyes fixed on the path ahead, as if he alone could see the shape of things to come. A few miles beyond, the road dipped into a broad valley, where the ruins of an ancient watchtower lay broken like the bleached bones of some great beast. Here the Rosewood narrowed, hemmed in by gnarled oaks, whose branches clutched at the sky like arthritic fingers. Jon's thoughts drifted to Bran, isolated now in his chamber, his legs useless but his mind aflame with secrets the old gods had shown him. He reminded himself that every step he took away from Winterfell was a step toward its safety, that his duty to the living now outweighed all other vows. Grey Tim came forward to report in a low voice, "We'll reach Last Hearth by midday tomorrow if the roads hold." No sign of raiders since the crossing at the Fornoy Bridge. His gray cloak, the sigil of House Umber stitched on the shoulder, flapped as he spoke. Jon nodded. "We must press on swiftly. Lord Tallheart's warnings cannot be ignored. I want scouts ahead on every rise." Bendo. Tim inclined his head, calling back to the other riders, while Jon looked west toward the distant mountains where the sky swallowed peaks in snow and mist. Beyond them lay the Wall, the realm of his other world. Not one he had chosen, but one that had claimed him by oath. He thought of Eliezer Thorne's snarling orders atop Castle Black, of the wildling scouts he had once hunted but later spared. Would his decision to stay at Winterfell now bring him service among lords rather than outcasts? In the flicker of torchlight at dusk, that question pressed on him like the tightening of a gauntlet. Night fell fully as they rode through the first band of pines, and Jon ordered camp set in a forest clearing. He oversaw the pitching of tents himself, bartering a brief nod with the cook and a hearty greeting to the stable hands. Ghost found a hollow beneath two leaning trunks and settled beside him, ears twitching at every crack of wood and rustle in the underbrush. Jon fetched a bowl of hot broth and sat with his back to the largest pine, the rough bark pressing into him, offering silent solace. Beyond the flickering firelight, the dark trees formed a ring, ancient sentinels guarding secrets older than the first men. By the time his meal cooled, all but the watch had turned in for the night. Jon unstrapped Longclaw from his back and ran a hand over the pommel carved with the snarling visage of a wolf. He contemplated the numbers etched into the silver blade, reminders of fathers he had never known, of debts owed and blood debts paid. Here in the flicker and hiss of the dying fire, he felt the weight of leadership settle on him anew. He was no longer a lone bastard at Winterfell, nor a brother among the black-clad men of the Night's Watch. He was a Stark acting in Stark ways, bound by honor to preserve the North. A twig cracked sharply in the darkness. Ghost's hackles rose, neck rippling as he rose and slunk between Jon and the trees. Jon's hand slid to the sword's hilt, every muscle coiled for action. For a breath, the world held its stillness. Then a boy's voice, barely above a whisper. "My lord, I meant no harm." "Thou." John exhaled slowly and dropped his hand from Longclaw. A youth about 14, clad in simple homespun, rose from behind a low fallen trunk. His hair was cut ragged, face dirt-smeared, eyes wide with terror. "Ghost," snarled low. The boy froze, hands raised. "It's all right," John said, voice gentle. "Who are you?" "Carter, my lord." The boy stammered. "I serve House Tallheart. When I heard the riders, I thought I'd see. Please, I have news." John stood, sheathing his sword. "Speak." Carter swallowed. "Bandits took the small folk south of Last Hearth. They burned half a farm, 2 souls lost. My uncle tries to gather what's left and warn the villages." "Ben?" John's jaw clenched. "You should have come sooner." "I wanted to," Carter said. "But the road's dangerous and my mother, she begged me to stay." His voice broke, and John saw tears in the boy's eyes. Beneath the stolen bravery, a child's fear. John nodded. "Tell your uncle to bring what men he can spare to join us at First Crossing. We ride at dawn." The boy straightened, relief and resolve replacing fear. He knelt, bowing his head. "Yes, my lord." "Thank you, my lord." John waved him off. Carter slipped away into the shadows, and John settled back beside the fire, Ghost returning to curl at his feet. The night seemed deeper now, shadow coiling like living things among the trees. John stared into the dying embers, thinking of the North's heart, Winterfell, and how it pulsed within him. At first light, they rode again. The forest thinned, giving way to open moorland dotted with old barrowed tombs and steam vents where the earth exhaled in mists. Winding streams cut silver paths through the heather, and the road, though muddy, was at least visible. Scouts rode ahead and behind, watching every rise. When Last Hearth came into view, its stout walls crowned by watchtower, John felt the first real pull of hope. Below the rampart, people moved. Farmers, women, the young and old, all pausing in their labors to tip hats or curtsy as he and his company passed. He dismounted in the courtyard, colder air swirling with the sounds of hammers on metal and low mutterings of strategy. Lord Tallheart, a lean man with hawk-like features and graying hair tied back, approached, flanked by banners bearing the twin gray lilies of House Tallheart on black. "My lord," Tallheart greeted in a voice like gravel sliding downhill. "Your presence honors us." John inclined his head. "News travels too slowly. I must know the true scope of this threat." Tallheart gestured up the ramparts. "We have watchers posted. The bandits, some say they are deserters from the Crownlands, are bold, but poorly led. They strike quickly and vanish. We lost 2 men scouting the eastern ford yesterday." John looked past him at the distant river shimmering in morning light. "The river crossings must be watched. I'll assign patrols." "And more," Tallheart continued. "A raven arrived from Storm's End. Lord Baratheon pledges 300 knights, if we can hold until they arrive." John's heart lightened. "Then we have hope, but we cannot wait here. I will lead a detachment to clear the road south. If we break their numbers, the scattered folk might rally behind us." Tallheart nodded solemnly. "I will send my best riders with you. We ride within the hour." Before the sun rose high, Joan's force of 100 men, knights, archers, and militia, bore south along the road, Ghost padding alongside the vanguard. The skies were steel, veins of pink dissolving in the east as dawn came. Mist lay in the valleys, and John felt its chill seep beneath his cloak. Yet in the urgency of marching steel and patient eyes scanning for ambush, he felt alive. No longer the boy cloaked in bastard's shame, nor the oath-bound brother of the Black, but the wolf of Winterfell, moving to defend his lands against chaos. They encountered the first raiders at a narrow gorge, where the road passed between sheer cliffs. Smoke curled above makeshift barricades, and the distant glint of steel warned of skirmish ahead. John drew Longclaw, its blade singing. "Advance!" he shouted, and his men surged forward in disciplined ranks. Arrows hissed, and horned helmets shone like death's mockery under the gray sky. John's shield arm rose as he charged, ignoring the pain of the soaked leather biting at his skin. Ghost darted through the fray, fangs bared, scattering archers from behind the enemy line. Steel rang on steel. Jon found himself face to face with a tall man in battered plate, eyes blazing with desperation. They clashed, each blow ringing through the gorge. Jon parried and countered, memories of his sentinel training with Sir Roderick guiding each motion. At last he feinted high and thrust low. Long claw piercing mail. The raider dropped his sword with a startled gasp and sank to his knees. Jon's knuckles whitened on the hilt. The fight was not about mercy but survival. He drove the man's head to the ground with his boot. "Yield," he said, voice hushed. The raider bowed his head. Jon stepped back and allowed him to live, a choice his father would have approved. Around him, his men pressed the advantage. Within minutes, the raiders dispersed, fleeing into the gloom or laying down arms. Jon called for a halt and bound the prisoners under guard. The road ahead now clear, he watched the eastern sky grow brighter. The ache in his chest had eased, replaced by purpose. A lord's duty was not a chain, but a calling. For the North, for his father's memory, and for the lives of those who looked to Winterfell as their shield, he would stand fast. He sheathed Longclaw and turned to his men. "Gather the wounded. Ride for Last Hearth and tend to the villages. Scouts, send word south that the road is open." Mensauen. As the sun climbed, the gorge fell silent, but for the hum of recovery. Jon paused at the edge and looked northward, toward the mountains where his journey had begun. In his mind, the banners of House Stark flew proud on Winterfell's battlements once more. He pictured Catelyn's anxious face, Bran's quiet resolve, and Robb's fierce determination. They would all, Starks by blood or by bond, press on in their struggles. And he, Jon Snow, would be here, standing guard between the north and whatever darkness winter yet held. With a final glance at the winding gorge, he mounted Silverstream, Ghost at his side, and rode slowly back along the road he had cleared. Each hoofbeat was a vow renewed, to honor his father, to protect the living, and to keep Winterfell standing tall through the long night to come. The wind sighed around him, and for a moment, he felt a whisper in the breeze, an echo of Ned's voice, guiding him from beyond the grave. Jon gripped his reins and smiled, the promise of duty lighting his features. Winterfell endured because he would not let it fall, and so long as he breathed, the North would stand unbroken. Oh, how, and Jon Snow rode through the aftermath of battle with hollow lungs, the taste of cold iron and acrid smoke still clinging to the air. Behind him, Silverstream's flanks heaved under the weight of his armor-clad form. Beside him, Ghost trotted with silent purpose. The gorge lay quiet now, its stones slick with sweat and blood, its narrow floor littered with discarded weapons and broken shields. As the sun climbed toward noon, it cast long shadows from the gorge's sheer walls, turning them into stark murals of light and dark. Jon felt each breath deepen his resolve. They had driven back the raiders, but the war for the North was only beginning. They paused at the mouth of the ravine to gather the wounded and tend to the dead. Cries of pain and relief mingled in the cold air. A young man, his face etched with grime and fear, clutched a bandaged arm and stared at Jon with gratitude and disbelief. Jon knelt, examining the wound before nodding to the healer who followed in their train. "Hell live," Jon said softly, and the man's shoulders slumped as if the world had grown heavier with that single word. Jon rose and surveyed the road ahead. It snaked over moorland, through forests and across rivers, toward Last Hearth, and beyond to Storm's End. He would press on, though the miles would stretch before him like an unending twilight. Each village he passed whispered of hardship. Thatched roofs half collapsed under frost, barns emptied of grain, families huddled around dying fires. At each point, he made certain his men left provisions, direction for aid, and word that the North had not forgotten them. By afternoon, the escort reached the village of Ridgewood, where smoke curled from every chimney and people lined the crossroads. A woman knelt by a crate of flour and grain that Jones' men had left, pressing her cheek against the cool wood as though communion with sustenance itself were salvation. Children played by the well, their voices bright against the dull ache in Joan's chest. He dismounted and approached the small circle, his cloak trailing behind him. The villagers bowed and knelt. He waved them silent, offering only a nod. "I am Jon Snow of Winterfell," he announced, voice carrying across the square. "My father lies in death, but the North lives. These supplies are for you. My men will see to your wounded and burned. We march on to rid the road of foes. News of our deeds will reach every bannerman's hall, that they may answer our call." A hush settled, broken only by the crackle of a distant hearth. Then a woman stepped forward, her hair the silver of moonlight, and her eyes the gray of storm clouds. "You honor us, my lord," she said. "We feared we were forgotten." "You are not," Jon replied, meeting her gaze. "Tell the people of Ridgewood that Winterfell stands while I draw breath." She bowed, and the villagers cried out their gratitude. Jon mounted again. Ghost leapt up to his side, and they pressed onward into the gathering dusk. That night, they made camp on the edge of an ancient forest, the trees towering like silent sentinels. Jon sat beside the fire, dawn's heat replaced by night's chill. Ghost lay curled at his feet, and around him his captains and scouts gathered, their faces drawn but resolute. Grey Tim, the head rider, approached. "Lord Snow." Scouts report a warband to the south, perhaps 200 men, shielded by a mercenary banner from the Crownlands. They move toward Hayward's Ford. Jon nodded, the firelight flickering against his sharp features. "We cannot let them raid deeper into the north. We push at dawn." "Who commands their banner?" "Sir Callan of the March," Tim replied. "A sellsword of some repute. Fought for Renly Baratheon last season before striking out on his own." Jon's hand tightened on the hilt at his side. "Renly's knights ride for the Stormlands now. That leaves their raiding parties unchecked." He stood, dusting ash from his cloak. "I will lead the assault." Captain Mullen, a veteran of the Fist of the First Men, rose as well. "The men will follow you, my lord." Jon surveyed each face. Grey Tim, blood on his sword hand. Mullen, grizzled and tireless. The archers whose yew bows shone faintly in the firelight. The militia, stiff with fear yet bound to the cause. They were not a dozen knights in shining armor, but they bore the North in their hearts. He lowered his voice. "We ride not for glory, but to protect hearth and home. We ride for Winterfell, and for every child who sleeps beneath a thatch, without fear of fire or steel." "Menawai." A murmur of assent rippled through them. Jon sheathed his sword and strode into his tent, returning a moment later with Longclaw unsheathed and Ghost at his side. "Rest well. Tomorrow we strike true." He strode away, leaving them to prepare. The pre-dawn air was brittle when they broke camp. Jon wore only a single cloak, letting the cold steel of fear sharpen his senses. Ghost padded ghost-like beside him as they rode through shadowed trees. The world hushed beneath winter's breath. As the first light crept through the boughs, they emerged on a clearing where the enemy had camped by a wide river bend. Fires glowed in clusters, and the rattling of arms reached Jon's ears like a warning bell. Jon halted his men in the tree line. 200 mercenaries and raiders, falcon-emblazoned shields leaning against logs. In the center, Sir Callan sat atop a warhorse, his dark helm crested with black feathers. He surveyed the Northmen below with a sneer. "A bold lot," Callan called, his voice carrying. "Bastard of Winterfell. I've no quarrel with you. Ride back to your wolf's den while you can." "Nendabanter." Jon slid from Silverstream in silence, walking his horse to the fringe of light. Ghost stood at his shoulder. The mercenaries watched with curiosity. Some spurred horses, wolf banners and badger standards fluttering in the mist. Jon removed his helm. "I am Jon Snow," he said, voice steady. "And I have a quarrel with every man who invades the north." Callan spat, turning in his saddle. "Then come, bastard, and taste steel." Jon raised Longclaw. For the north. The word slipped free, carrying the promise of every Stark before him. Then he charged, Ghost streaking ahead. The clash was swift and brutal. Steel sang against steel. Arrows splintered shields. War horses reared and thundered hooves. Jon plunged into the fray, focusing only on the fight at hand. The swing of Callan's blade, the shouts of his own men rallying behind him. He met Callan at a fallen log, their swords crossing in a shower of sparks. Callan's helm creaked against stone when Jon's blade struck true, and the mercenary stumbled back with a curse. Jon pressed the advantage, Longclaw flashing in the dim light. A glancing blow, a step aside, and Callan's sword clattered to the ground. Jon held his blade to Callan's throat. "Yield," he said, voice low. Callan glared, sweat mixing with blood beneath his eyes. Finally, he jerked his head. "I yield." Jon dropped his sword and stepped back. The mercenary banner fell silent. Around them, the raiders sank to one knee, dropping arms in submission. Jon lifted his hand. "Leave the north. Return south across the Trident, and tell any who follow you that Winterfell will not fall." A solitary cheer rose, muffled by fog and fallen spits of smoke. Jon mounted Silverstream and rode back to his captains. "Take them south under guard. Let House Tallhart deal with them at Last Hearth. We ride on to Storm's End." 2 days later, weary but unbroken, Jon Snow's force arrived at the battered walls of Last Hearth. The hall stood silent guard over a valley of tents and wounded. Lord Tallhart met him at the gate, relief and admiration in his eyes. "By the old gods and the young, you have done more for the north in 2 days than many lords in a year," Tallhart said, slapping Jon's shoulder. Jon dismounted, Ghost circling his feet. "The road is open. The villagers are safe. For now. Soon the Knights of Storm's End will arrive, and the reach of our defense will extend beyond these walls." Tallhart nodded. "And what of you, bastard of Winterfell? Will you continue south?" Jon paused, recalling the council at Winterfell. Bran's fragile body healing beneath the weirwood. Sansa's letters arriving with news of Robb's bloody victories and tragic losses. Catelyn's shoulders bowed by grief, but still unbowed. His purpose had evolved. No longer merely to scallop the roads with his own blade, but to be the North's keeper, its ambassador, its heart. "I will ride on," he said finally. "To Storm's End, to speak with Lord Baratheon. Then I will return home." Tallhart bowed. "I will send your message and prepare a guard to escort you south." Jon retrieved his cloak and helmet, feeling the weight of duty settle on him once more. He looked north, toward the distant banners of Winterfell. A pale wisp on the horizon. A promise deserted, a promise renewed. He would not leave the north unprotected. He would stand at its gate, a sword in the darkness, a watcher upon its walls, as he had vowed beneath the weirwood. And though his fate had diverged from the path of the Night's Watch, his loyalty to the living remained unbroken. As he rode away from Last Hearth, Silverstream's hooves stirring the dust of the Roserad, Jon felt something shift within him. A fierce, defiant flame kindled by loss, loyalty, and love for the land he called home. The road south stretched long and uncertain, but every league brought him closer to allies and reinforcements. Every dawn reminded him that winter still approached, but the north was no stranger to cold. Its people endured, as would he. At his side, Ghost trotted with unerring devotion. And Jon Snow, Lord Bastard of Winterfell, allowed himself a single fierce smile. The north stood because he would not let it fall. And so long as he breathed, he would guard its battered gates, defend its battered people, and carry forward the legacy of House Stark, undaunted by death, unbowed by fate, ever vigilant against the gathering storm. "Yeah, Kay, and shall." Jon urged Silverstream into a canter as the Roserad unfurled beneath them, the rain-swollen earth dark and reflective in the half-light of dawn. Ghost padded at his side, the dire wolf's white coat smeared with mud, but his eyes held the same unflinching purpose. They had left Last Hearth behind with 300 Tallhart riders as an escort, but that host would turn back at the Crofters' Hold. From there on, it would be Jon and his few loyal companions against the wide world. The Barrowland stretched out like a bruise to their left, low hills dotted with ancient burial mounds. To their right, the green pall of the haunted forest rose in silent menace. At the crossing of the Fournoy Bridge, Jon checked the men's stirrups and sent half the riders ahead to scour the high ground. He would not allow another ambush to pin them between cliff and stream. By mid-morning, the scouts signaled safe passage, and the company pressed on, the wind finally drying the damp that clung to cloaks and mail. They passed through tiny hamlets. More than a handful of hovels clustered around a single well, where folk emerged with hope in their eyes, waving jars of milk or baskets of roots as offerings. Jon accepted each gift with a nod, feeling the responsibility settle heavier on his shoulders. This was not war east of the Trident, but a defense of hearth and home against those who would plunder and slay. His black cloak, trimmed with wolf fur, gleamed in the sun, marking him as a lord's son even where the banner of the Stark flew unraised. At midday they forded the Casterly's Mile stream, a trickle of water swollen by spring thaws, and found the ruined tall house burned to its foundations. The singed beams and charred stones spoke of fresh violence. Ghost nosed at a splintered log, sniffing blood long washed away by runoff. Jon crouched to examine ground around the ruins, 2 sets of boot prints leading west, following the road. "They move faster than we do," he muttered. "Tim, ride ahead with 20 men. See where they've gone." Gray Tim nodded and cantered off, his gray cloak flashing through the trees. Jon settled back into the march, the steady clop of Silverstream's hooves a metronome to his thoughts. He recalled the last letters from Robb. Victories earned at painful cost, banners stained red, the sorrow of the first true grief a son feels when he sees another boy weeping over a father's corpse. He thought of Sansa's verse in her final missive, lines scratched in haste. "Winterfell's hearth grows cold, brother. Come home if you can." But he had no time to return in safety. His home needed him here, the north beyond Winterfell. His oath to Ned, though spoken under the trees of the old gods, was eclipsed by the plea of living hearts. Twilight found them below the Watcher's Rest, where a lonely hill rose like an island in a field of tall grass. Jon chose their camp location carefully, just inside a cluster of wind-gnarled oaks, their trunks hollowed by centuries of storms. The canopy would shield their fires from prying eyes. The clearing was large enough for their tents, but tight enough that any enemy would have to break ranks to reach them. Ghost padded ahead to reconnoiter, returning with a low growl and a cautioning glance. Around the fire, Jon conferred with his captains. Captain Mullen, broad-shouldered and scarred from fights past, reported 3 more villages torched by raiders moving east. Each life lost weighed on Jon with the force of a mountain. He clenched his fist at the leather of his glove. "We push through the night," he said. "We cannot let them slip past us into the fingers. If they reach the river, we'll have to fight on water." Tim spoke up. "They'll scatter if they run. We might catch their stragglers, but the main host will cross and vanish among the wharves." "There." Jon's gaze remained fixed on the flames. "Then we must be faster. We ferried 36 boats at the ford near Maidenpool last winter. If we abandon our wagons and leave the road, we can travel by water." He studied each face. "We camp here 2 hours, then break our wagons, load only weapons and provisions onto the horses, and ride south to Maidenpool. We cross there and strike them on the river road." Silence held them until Mullen nodded. "It will give them no warning, and they will think us fools, fleeing the road." "Now, Jon allowed himself a small smile. "Then let them chase shadows." They rode again before midnight, the moon a sliver in the starless sky. Horses slipped in the muck. Riders huddled beneath cloaks as rain began to fall in muffled sheets. Ghost moved through the darkness with uncanny grace, occasionally pausing to sniff the wind. At Maidenpool's ford, they found the 12 small boats drawn up on the bank, the ferrymen long gone, some miles away no doubt, seeking cover. Jon's men lashed horses and men to barges, the creaks and splashes echoing on the river. Jon lingered on the bank listening. No war horns, no shouting. The raiders had not expected pursuit by water. In the swift current, they fought to steer the boats. But by dawn, They beached on the southern bank just south of Greenstone, a fortified town set on cliffs above the sea. Jon's heart lifted. His chase had not been in vain. The warband lay in the fields beyond. Half a league off, a ragged mass of tents and campfires, distinguishable only by wisps of smoke. He sounded the gong of attack, the hammer-strike code he had learned at Winterfell, and his men poured into the fields, swords gleaming. Caught between the cliffs and the river, the raiders broke like brittle wood under pressure. Jon rode at their center, Ghost at his flank, long claws slashing arcs of steel through shields. On the cliffs, archers rained arrows into the mercenaries' rear, driving them toward the current they had so recently crossed. Many plunged in, dragging armor into dark waters. Jon raised his blade to the dawn sky, letting out a challenge that echoed against the cliffs, and they broke. By midday, only scattered groups remained, fleeing east toward the wilderness. Jon ordered his men to take prisoners sparingly. Now that their host was shattered, there would be no more raids for many leagues. He gathered the leaders, mercenaries in branded helms, and interrogated them beneath a crimson flag of truce. They spoke of silver paid, of contracts with lords across the narrow sea, of shattered honor bought cheaply. He let them go with strict orders. Walk home farther south of here, tell no one of this place, and wage no more raids on the north. Few would live to tell the tale. Most would flee into the crags and be lost. When the brief council ended, Jon looked out to sea, where gulls wheeled over rolling waves. The salt breeze dried the sweat on his brow. He felt as though he had crossed a threshold. From bastard to lord, from soldier to commander of armies. Yet every step forward carried weight, every choice a consequence. He turned to Grey Tim. Send word to Last Hearth. Tell Lord Tallhart our work is done. I ride on to Storm's End, alone. Ben? Tim's eyes flickered in the morning sun. My lord, the road south is still perilous. You should take at least a dozen riders. Jon shook his head. My path lies with the living lords. I will not have my host mistaken for rebels or rogues. 20 men will accompany me. Tallhart knights and Stark men, both. That is enough to show I bear no threat. Tim bowed. As you command. That afternoon, they rode to the abandoned ferry house by Blackwater Bay and rested beneath the broken beams, mending leathers and scouring dishes in fresh water. Ghost drank deeply, then curled against Jon's leg, as though shielding him from the chill. Jon knelt beside the direwolf, finding calm in the animal's steady warmth. He thought of the land he defended, winter closing like a maw at every border, yet life blooming stubbornly in spring's cusp. He recalled Ned's final counsel. A lord protects his people. That is the strength of his house. He had stayed when his vows called him north. He would now ride south when duty called. No oath could bind him but the living cause. At dawn's first light, Jon rose, grasped Longclaw, and slipped into the frosted grass. 20 riders joined him. Half Tallharts, half Starks. Each helmet bearing the dire wolf's crest, or the gray lily. No banners flew. Their loyalty whispered, not proclaimed. They set forth along the sea road, winding past villages scarred by war, until the towers of Storm's End rose ahead, dark and impregnable. Jon halted at the gate, his cloak sodden from dew, his hair tangled with wind. A sentry challenged him. State your business. I am Jon Snow of Winterfell, he said. I bear word from Lord Stark and Lord Tallhart. I seek an audience with Lord Baratheon. The gates groaned open, and Gloucester's keep lay before him. Ramparts scarred by time, battlements crowned with banners of black stag on gold, the sigil of House Baratheon. As he rode through, Ghost padded closely at his side, eyes steady beneath the carved arch. Jon could feel the centuries of Storm's End's power lining the walls. The cries of sieges past, the river tides that battered these stones, the resolute will of Storm Kings who had stood when all others fell. At the courtyard, knights in trimmed armor, arranged in neat ranks, turned to face him, swords resting on shields. A herald stepped forward. Jon Snow of Winterfell, bastard son of Eddard Stark, welcome to Storm's End. You may enter the hall. Jon dismounted, offering reins to his squire, and followed the herald through vaulted corridors lined with stone effigies. The air grew warmer, drier, an embrace after the damp north. In the great hall, torches burned on sconces shaped like stag antlers. At the dais beneath tapestries depicting storms and lightning, Lord Renly Baratheon, or was it Stannis, waited. A brother of Robert's, his posture erect, gaze hard as flint. Jon squared his shoulders. "I come on behalf of the North," Jon said, voice echoing. "To bind our fates against the winter, and to ask the aid of Storm's End in preserving the realm." Stannis Baratheon regarded him in silence, then inclined his head. "You speak well, Jon Snow, and your deeds prove your words. But the realm owes you no debt for repelling brigands. What do you ask of Storm's End?" "Ben?" Jon let his gaze sweep the hall. Knights in heavy plate, counselors in dark robes, the banners of dragon and lion as far as the eye could see. A council that houses North and South stand together. A vow that no army shall wend north of the neck without Northermen at its head, and that no foe shall cross the North's borders while Winterfell stands. The storm-gray eyes of Stannis Baratheon did not flinch. A bold proposal, bastard of Winterfell. But in these days, boldness is what the realm needs. Nam. Jon inclined his head once. Then let it be spoken in the great hall. The North shall not stand alone. Silence held them as the torches flickered. Then Baratheon's lips curved in the faintest of smiles. "So be it." He stood, lifting a goblet of wine. "To the North, and to its brother houses, may we keep winter at bay together." Jon raised his own cup, heart light with hope and burden. The wine burned warm down his throat, and he felt the weight of the coming war ease, if only slightly. Around the hall, lords and knights murmured assent. Ghost padded forward at Jon's feet, and the direwolf, wolf of the North, guardian of Winterfell, pressed against Jon's leg, as though sharing triumph in silence. Outside, the rain had ceased, and storm clouds drifted beyond the cliffs, sky opening to a pale wash of blue. Behind the walls of Storm's End, Jon Snow tasted hope, and for the first time since Ned's death, believed that the North might be saved by more than broken swords and stubborn hearts. It would be saved by unity, by honor, and by the promise that no bastard would ever stand alone again in the face of winter's final night. Oh. N.D. The torchlight in the great hall at Storm's End still flickered. When Jon Snow finally excused himself from Lord Baratheon's council, the echo of vaulted ceilings and the muted murmur of lords arranging camp filled his ears as he retraced his steps through twisting corridors. Ghost padded silently at his heels, ears pricked to every shifting shadow. Even after the formal vows were spoken, Jon felt the weight of what lay ahead pressing against his shoulders. Unity was a fine thing, but unity needed constant tending, like an ember that must be fed again and again, lest it die to ash. Snow gathered his cloak tighter about him as he rode up the narrow stair toward the ramparts. Outside, the wind off Blackwater Bay cut with ice. The sea churned beneath a bruised sky. Below, torches flickered along the curtain wall, and the watch posted there stood like sentinels carved from granite. Jon remembered the wall, its stony blackness, the endless ranks of pines, the night sky so vast it swallowed men's voices. Here, Storm's End rose out of storm-racked stone, a bastion against the sea. Both walls faced terrible forces, different but equally unforgiving. Ghost reached the top first, nose to the wind, fur rippling in the gust. Jon climbed to join him, rising onto the battlement's broad ledge. The night's salt spray drifted in, stinging his cheeks, bracing him. He traced his gaze eastward, where the sea met clouds in a ragged horizon. Somewhere beyond that line lay the narrow sea, Essos, warbans of Sellswords, and the storms of fate that had battered his family. But here, in the north and the south, bound by his words, they must stand together. A low footstep announced a companion. Jon turned to find Sir Trenhold, one of the Baratheon knights who had ridden with him south. "My lord," the old knight said, voice muffled by his helm. "You ride back north soon?" Jon nodded. "At first light. 3 days hard riding to reach Last Hearth again. I must send word to Winterfell. My mother and my brother need to know that Baratheon men ride south to aid the North." Trenhold huffed. "Eh? You will ride through my lands if you like. We can spare 2 banners to escort you. No man will question a Baratheon standard." "No." Jon studied the knight's gold and black crest. "You owe me no service, sir. I travel to uphold the promise we swore today. I would rather ride with Stark men beneath the dire wolf." "A stubborn young man," Trenhold replied, but he did not argue. "As you wish. But take a Baratheon's shield at your back, if you'll allow it. Nothing is so strange in the dark road as meeting a lone rider." Jon placed a hand on the knight's gauntleted shoulder. "I appreciate it. Speak to Lord Baratheon on my behalf. I ride not as an envoy, but as a Stark of Winterfell." "Da." "Stark of Winterfell," Trenhold echoed, and allowed Jon to pass. Jon slid from the battlements, rejoining the courtyard. A handful of riders waited by the gate, cloaked figures leaning on saddles, their mounts stamping in the mud. Grey Tim stood among them, cloak wrapped tight. "We ride at dawn," he said. "How many banners from Baratheon?" "2," Jon replied. "But they ride under Stark and Tallheart colors." Tim bowed. "Then all 3 houses ride north. May the old gods and the new see us through." "Men see." Jon offered no words of comfort beyond a nod. He turned Silverstream northward once more. Ghost sprinted to his side as though he understood their path home, lay back through forests and fens, through villages resting now in uneasy peace. The road out of Storm's End led them past fields blackened by salt storms, where hardy vines clung to stony soil. Each mile carried a sense of purpose renewed. Jon felt the steady thrum of duty, the lifeblood of leadership. Scouts rode ahead to clear the road. Grey Tim and his company formed the vanguard. Baratheon knights in full plate riding beside Tallheart men-at-arms. Jon lingered in the center, flanked by a handful of his own Stark guards, blades sheathed, but hands always near hilts. When the crossroads of Fairview appeared, marked by a weathered stone sentinel carved with a stag, Jon halted the column. Messengers from the Vale and from the Reach had carried news of his covenant south. Now he needed word carried north. He drew a roll of parchment from his saddlebag and handed it to Grey Tim. "Take this to Lord Tallheart at Last Hearth. Ride through the night if need be, no matter frost or storm." Tim tucked the letter into his cloak. "At once, my lord." "And one more," Jon said, pulling a second dispatch. "This for my mother at Winterfell. Take 2 riders. One from my guard, one from the Baratheons. They ride together. No man goes without a companion." Tim's gray eyes brightened. "A wise command, my lord. I will see it done." Jon dropped the reins and dismounted. "I'll bury my mother's letter beneath the weirwood's roots when I return. Tell her the promise stands." "Then now." Tim bowed, and Jon climbed back into the saddle. They resumed the march, the road carrying them northward into gathering dusk. Their ride that second night was a test of endurance. Snow began to fall in light flurries, drifting silk against black cloaks. The wind rose to howl through the gaps in their cloaks, biting at exposed skin. Ghost refused to leave the column's flank, prowling through the snowdrifts, nose to spoil and scent. Several riders flagged, their horses exhausted, but Jon refused to slow. He stripped a Baratheon knight of a spare cloak and offered it to a Stark guard whose shivers turned his teeth to ice. The knight insisted on riding in only a simple tunic and gambeson. Jon had to pull him aside by the shoulder before the man would relent. Leadership, Jon reminded himself, was as much in showing mercy as in meting out orders. When the ravine of Fournoy Bridge appeared in the gray dawn, the snow lay heavy on the pines, a thick glaze atop bare limbs. The bridge itself had gaped open, plank by plank torn by winter's weight, but Jon's scouts had prepared. A hastily built causeway of fallen logs and packed earth bore their weight as they crossed. Beyond, the Barrowlands loomed, silent under snow. Jon stared westward at the hills crowned by burial mounds, a land filled with memory, where the dead watched the living from beneath the earth. He thought of his father in the crypt below Winterfell. He thought of his sister Sansa, writing letters by candlelight in the summer hall that was no more. He thought of his half-brother Robb, whose banners had flown and whose victories were stained by loss. And he thought of himself. neither true-born nor bastard, but something in between, forged anew by every vow, every battle, every mile ridden. At midday, they reached Last Hearth once more. The castle's snow-dusted towers rose above a camp bustling with activity. Healers tending the wounded, women distributing bread, children chasing snowballs with laughter that sounded strange in the midst of war. Lord Talhart awaited Jon in the courtyard, his face ruddied by cold but bright with welcome. "Lord Snow," Talhart said, striding forward, "you have my gratitude. Baratheon men rode with you north?" "Nah." Jon nodded. "And Stark men rode with them." "The North stands together, Lord Talhart." Talhart's gravelly laugh was sharp as stone. "By the gods, it may live yet. Now I pray Winterfell stands as strong." Jon met his gaze. "It stands so long as I stand with it." The Baratheon escort withdrew under Talhart's command, their banners folding from the wind. Jon left Silverstream and Ghost under the care of stable hands and followed Talhart into the great hall. There, by the weirwood-etched hearth, Maester Luwin waited with letters and flags set aside for the return to Winterfell. Jon took the parchments carefully, eyes lingering on his mother's seal. A gray direwolf on white, the final bond between father and son. He stepped into the godswood, the white weirwood stark against snow, coast at his heels. Beneath the blood-red leaves, he knelt and placed the letter in the hollow of the roots. He spoke softly, as though conversing with something ancient. "Lady Catelyn, I have kept my oath. The North will not fall. We ride south to seek allies, and return to guard the land we love." And a cold wind stirred the leaves overhead, and Jon closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the air seemed clearer, the path ahead less burdened. He rose, kissed the bark and turned to Ghost. "Come, we ride for Winterfell." They made camp that night just beyond the godswood, flames dancing in iron lanterns. Maester Luwin arrived with hot broth and a message. Sansa had ridden northward in hopes of seeing her brother, bearing tidings of Robb's last victory beyond the Twins. Jon pushed aside the broth and seized the letter. Inside were Sansa's careful words, full of hope and fear. He read them by lantern light, then crumpled the parchment into his fist. "North," he said, voice steady. "At dawn we ride north." Ghost lay at his feet, ears drooped, but watchful. Jon looked out at the half-moon rising above dark pines, imagining it shining over Winterfell's towers. The road ahead would be long and fraught, raiders and cold shadows and memories, but he would ride every league of it. He had sworn to defend the living, to bind North and South against winter's coming. He had sworn to Ned's memory, to his mother's hopes, to his sister's faith. He had sworn to the people he served, and to the gods both old and new. And he would not fail. Jon Snow, bastard no more, lord of his blood, servant of the realm, would see Winterfell's gates safe once again. The wind howled through the trees, carrying his vow into the night. Ghost rose, nuzzled his hand, and stood ready. Together they would journey home. Injay. Oh. Jon and his small company rode through the waning hours of dawn, the forest around them muffled by a recent snowfall that lay thick on branches and softened every footfall. Silverstream trudged steadily, her flanks shining with sweat beneath frost-crusted fur, and Ghost padded alongside like a phantom, white fur gleaming against the dark trunks. Jon kept his gaze fixed on the winding track before him, tracing its every twist through the copse, though he knew the way by heart. He could feel Winterfell drawing closer with every measured beat of his mare's hooves. The air grew sharper as they descended a gentle rise, and before them stood the twin towers of Winterfell's ice gate, stern and unyielding in the pale light. Snow drifted against the walls in waves, and the banners of House Stark hung still, the dire wolf sigil dark against the white. Jon felt a tightening in his chest, a tug of longing mixed with the weight of his promise. He drew rein, allowing the others to gather behind him, and rode under the arch into the courtyard, where torches burnt low and servants paused in their labors to catch his approach. Maester Luwin appeared, his chain of office glinting, and Catelyn stood beside him, shawl wrapped tight about her shoulders, cheeks flushed by anxiety and cold. Sansa hovered behind her, cloak drawn high, her hands clasped as though in prayer. Bran, leaning on his crutches, watched from the shadow of the godswood, gray eyes bright beneath frost-touched lashes. Jon dismounted and lowered his reins. For a moment, none of them spoke. The world held its breath under winter's hush. Catelyn stepped forward first, arms spreading wide. "My son," she said, voice torn between relief and reproach. Jon closed the distance and embraced her fiercely, mindful of the scar where she had once pressed her hand against his cheek, counting the paces of his heart. "You have been gone so long," she whispered, and he felt the tremor in her shoulders. He drew back and met her eyes. "I have ridden for your sake, and for the sake of all our people. The North stands united, Stark, Tallheart, Baratheon banners side by side." He turned to Sansa. "Your Robb fights bravely in the South, sister. I bring word of kin sworn to our defense." Sansa's pale lips curved in a small, uncertain smile. "I feared you lost to the snow and wolves." She reached out, and he clasped her hand. "I could never be lost so long as Winterfell remains." Bran approached, and Jon knelt to meet his gaze. "Bran," he said softly, "how fare you?" The boy's pale face broke into a grin. "Better than the horses outside," Bran teased, though his voice carried strength. "Father would be proud." Jon pressed his forehead to Bran's in the old Stark greeting. "He would be," he agreed. Behind them, the courtyard stirred with life as the riders unsaddled and tended Silverstream and Ghost. Grey Tim approached Jon in a flourish of snow, reporting in a low voice. "The southern patrols are at their posts. The road's clear. Lord Baratheon sends 2 knights to remain, and Tallheart men hold the Fournoy Bridge. All counties along the Roserat echo your covenant." Jon nodded, satisfaction stirring. "Good. See that the villagers of Ridgewood and Ridgewater are given seeds and grain at your next passing. They must not starve through winter." Tim bowed and turned to go. Catelyn hailed her steward from the Great Hall steps. "Jon, come inside. Warmth and food await." He allowed himself to be guided into the hall, Ghost padding beside him. Ghost's white fur, a stark reflection at the edge of the hearth's glow. The hall was warm with the heat of many torches, logs crackling in the ancient fireplace. Servants bustled with trays of bowls filled with roasted partridge and steaming broth. The familiar scents of wood smoke, trampled pines, and roasting meat enveloped him like a homecoming born of memory. Jon seated himself beside Catelyn and Sansa at the high table. Looking out across the flickering faces of lords and knights who had turned their horses and banners homeward, he saw familiar shields. The gray lilies of Tallheart, the black stag of Baratheon, the wolf of House Manderly from White Harbor, who had pledged ships in case of need. Here were his people, weary yet unbowed. He raised a goblet of spiced wine. "To the north," he said. "May it never know subjugation more dire than its winters." A roar of assent rose, and the hall's rafters shivered with the echo of loyalty. Late into the evening, Jon spoke quietly with Catelyn and Maester Luwin about the state of Winterfell stores. The Maester presented parchment rolls, the yield from the last granaries, the expected rations through the next 2 moons, plans to distribute firewood to the farthest outlying farms. A chill breeze drifted down the hall when the doors opened, and Jon rose to draw the curtains, sealing in the warmth of the fire. He glanced back at Bran's figure in the shadow beside his mother. "Bran will need the ravens restored," he said. "If the wall must send its own, our lines of communication will be vital." Catelyn nodded. "I will see to it in the morning." The night's layers of smoke and laughter faded as Jon slipped from the hall and wandered to the godswood. Beneath the weirwood's bared limbs and in the hush of pale snow, he bowed before the carved face, the eyes that always watched, the mouth that spoke no word but spoke of duty. He laid a hand on the twisted roots where he had buried his letter, and in the hush, he made another vow: to guard the North through winter's darkest days, to unite its houses in common purpose, and to stand sentinel against the chaos beyond. The wind sighed through the skeletal branches, and in that whisper, Jon heard the echo of every Stark's legacy. The following dawn brought the first true storm of the season, wind gusting like a living thing, snow stabbing at faces, and low clouds creaking across the sky. Riders summoned from Winterfell's stable greeted Jon on the walls, urging him indoors. But Jon pressed on, heart buoyed by the knowledge that his home held firm. Footfalls crunched on the battlement's frost dust, each echo a pledge. He paused at the rim overlooking Wintertown, where smoke rose in gray spirals from chimneys and figures, crossed the market square in bundled cloaks. Below him, the yard was a hive of activity. Woodcutters hauling logs, stable hands bedding down horses, guard formations drilling beneath the onslaught of wind. Jon allowed himself a moment to relish the sight. His people, moving as one, determined against the season's bite. He turned to Grey Tim, who stood at his shoulder, cloak billowing. "See that no banners leave this castle, unless by my command," Jon said. "Let every banner of the north fly here." Tim inclined his head. "As you say, my lord." "Winterfell's wards will hold." Jon returned inside, where warmth thrummed in every hearth. He convened his council in the solar. Catelyn, Sansa, Maester Luwin, Roderick Castle, and Grey Tim. A wide table bore maps of the north, its roads, rivers, and castles, and Jon spread his palms over the parchment. "Storm's End will hold a force at Maidenpool," he said. "Last Hearth will send food north along the Roserad. White Harbor's ships will patrol the Bay of Ice, discourage any raiders from crossing the sea. We must knit our defenses tighter than any chainmail." Catelyn pointed to the carvings at the room's end. Dire wolves in low relief. "We will," she vowed. "And when spring comes, we ride out as one host." He met Sansa's gaze. She bore the mark of resolve, the pale fire of a Stark-born lord. "You will see that the ravens at the rookery are stocked with food and wool," he said. "Send messages to every castle. Stand fast. We ride as one." Roderick and Tim took up pens and quill, while Catelyn placed a comforting hand on Jon's shoulder. "You have done well, son," she said. "Your father would be proud." Jon's breath caught, and he closed his eyes, offering a silent word of thanks to the father who had taught him honor, the mother who had raised him as her own, and the gods, old and new, that guided his fate. When he opened his eyes, his face was set as if carved from stone. "Then let us prepare," he said. "Winter comes, and we will meet it, as Stark men and women." In the days that followed, Winterfell transformed into a fortress of readiness. Barracks were cleaned and strewn with fresh straw. The forges glowed day and night, producing blades and mending armor. Every household contributed. Seamstresses stitched blankets, farmers brought in every last root crop, and the smiths struck pikes for the levies. Jon walked among them, at the forge's roar, the women's clatter of needles in the hall of tapestries, the fields where grain was stored under tarps, and offered counsel, praise, or a simple nod of thanks. In each eye he saw the pride of purpose, the knowledge that they stood under the dire wolf's protection. Roderick Castle trained a new guard detachment in the yard, drilling children of tradesmen alongside sons of minor knights. Jon asked the first cohort of recruits to swear under his gaze, "I am the North's shield, I am Winterfell's voice. I stand between the living and the darkness." Their voices rang clear in the cold air. Jon saw himself in them, the chosen among many, the oath-bound to keep watch and warn. He watched Ghost step forward and raise his muzzle as if in echo, and he allowed himself a small smile. Late one evening, as the storm's wrath slackened to a biting gale, Jon found himself again in the Godswood. This time, Sansa joined him, her warm cloak drawn snug. She leaned against the weirwood's trunk. "Do you think we can hold them?" she asked quietly. Jon placed a hand on the bark and then on her shoulder. "I know we can," he said. "The North endures what no one else survives." She looked up at him, shadows playing across her face. "You endued us with hope," she said. "And hope is the only thing they cannot take." He let her words settle, then spoke softly. "And when hope is strong, even the longest winter must break." She nodded, and for a moment they stood in silence, two siblings born of ice and blood, anchored by the same promise. Weeks passed. Snow fell in white blankets, thicker than any on record. The roads froze solid. Wolves howled at distant ridges. Yet inside Winterfell's walls, light shone from every window. When scouts reported a band of raiders probing near the Fornoy Bridge, Jon rode out with Roderick Castle, and a troop of 50, accomplishing in an hour what had once taken days. When the ravens from Moat Cailin brought word of wildling movements to the north, Jon dispatched riders to warn the Night's Watch and to urge caution among the clans. When the fires at Maidenpool dwindled, he sent stores south to keep Storm's End's armaments supplied. Each day was a challenge answered, each night a vigil kept. In the Great Hall, Catelyn oversaw the distribution of food and winter clothing. Sansa taught the young girls of the castle how to mend furs and sew cloaks lined with rabbit pelts. Bran, from the Godswood, watched the snows fall and dreamed of journeys beyond the wall. And Jon in the Solar penned letters to Robb, urging him to press his advantage in the Riverlands and reminding him that home awaited whenever the war allowed. Summerfell, a small horn of land far down the eastern coast, suffered unusual jelly blights in its stores. A raven arrived, pleading for seed and supplies. Jon diverted grain from Winterfell's storehouses, dispatching Grey Tim with a ready force and a letter sealed with the dire wolf. The supply lines crossed ice and sea, but the grains arrived before the harvest stores failed. Word came back that the Lords of the Vale had pledged trade in exchange for aid, binding the North's coffers to the Vale's support. By the time the solstice approached, Winterfell's banner halls were full of knights, levies, and mercenaries sworn to Jon's banner. The feast of the Deepwood Moraine had long passed, but every evening the great hall rang with song and laughter. A defiance of winter's gloom, Jon stood at the dais one night, glass in hand, and surveyed the hall. Catelyn beside him, Sansa at her side, Roderick Castle and Grey Tim flanking them, and lords of many houses, Tallhart, Manderley, Dustin, Glover, seated in honored places. Even the Baratheon knights who remained had claimed seats on the lower benches, their black shields stowed against the wall. Jon raised his glass. "To Winterfell," he said. "To House Stark and to the north we hold. May our walls stand unbroken, our halls echo with life, and our wolves hunt at our side." The hall thundered with approval. Torches danced in every hand, lighting faces alight with loyalty and warmth. Outside the storm raged, but within, there was hearth and hope. That night, Jon returned to the Godswood alone. Ghost padded at his side like a shadow made real. He knelt before the weirwood, snow gathering on his fur-lined cloak, and pressed his forehead to the ancient bark. In the hush of swirling flakes, he whispered, "We are ready." The trees' pale eyes watched in silence, and the wind carried his vow into a world of frost and shadow. Winterfell held, and Jon Snow, no longer merely the unseen watcher on distant walls, but the lord behind its gates, kept faith with the living and with the memory of all who had come before. The North would endure the long night, for as long as honor held, and hope burned bright beneath the snow. K.N.D. Jon awoke before dawn, the gray light of winter's first morning filtering through narrow slits in the Solar's latticed windows. His breath formed faint mist as he rose, drawing his woolen cloak tight and stepping quietly past Maester Luwin's chamber into the corridors beyond. The castle was nearly silent, save for the distant patter of boots in the yard where the new guard kept watch. Ghost met him at the threshold, silent as ever, and together they descended the stairs toward the Godswood. Snow clung to every branch, thick and unbroken, transforming the weirwood boughs into ivory arches that glimmered in the pre-dawn hush. Jon approached the carved face and laid a hand against the coarse pale bark, feeling its cold resilience. He closed his eyes, recalling the burden of oaths he had taken and the victories achieved. Beneath the snow, roots wound deep into the frozen earth, just as his word now held firm in the hearts of the North. Today he must act again, not only as a sentinel but as a judge, for news had come last eve of a dispute between houses Glover and Serwyn. By the time the first torchlit riders gathered in the courtyard, Jon stood at the head of the dais. Grey Tim and Sir Roderick flanked him, solemn beneath their helms. Lord Glover's retinue arrived first, clad in green and black, cheeks ruddy with cold and anger. Lord Serwyn's men followed, scarlet cloaks stained with mud, eyes narrowed. Both sides dismounted stiffly, their mounted knights forming two rigid lines before the dais steps. John allowed the silence to settle like a shroud before speaking. "I have called you here under the laws of the North," he said, voice clear. "A man from Serwyn's woods felled a prize stag belonging to House Glover. In gratitude for the forests we share, we agreed long ago that no hunter shall claim another's quarry. Yet the beast was slain in cold blood." He paused, letting the weight of those words press upon them. "Lord Serwyn, your men admit the kill. Why?" Lord Serwyn, a lean man with silver-threaded hair, stepped forward. "My lord, the stag crossed the Mirewood boundary, and my hunter acted within his rights. The wood ranger saw it, marked its antlers, and claimed it for House Serwyn. Now." John turned to Lord Glover's representative, a broad-shouldered knight in emerald velvet. "And you, Lord Glover? How do you answer this?" The knight's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "My lord, the stag's track lay well within our woods. Our sentries recorded it crossing only as it fled. The Serwyn hunter laid traps beyond his own borders, and tracked it until it fell in our grove." Roderick Castle nudged the dais. "Both sides bring witnesses, both swear under oath. No clear boundary, no clear truth. Then der wine." John folded his arms. "Then we must settle by challenge, in the old way." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Trial by combat was rare, but binding. Champion against champion. No remorse. The victor's claim stands. A hush of tension followed. Lord Serwyn drew himself straight. "My brother, Bran Serwyn, will ride." Across the yard, Glover's knight did not hesitate. "I go myself," he growled, stepping forward. John nodded. "So be it. Tomorrow at midday before these walls. Until then, both houses will hold their men at rest." He dismissed them, and the courtyard emptied in heavy silence. Ghost padded close, as John watched the last figures vanish behind the gate. That night John sat by the hearth in the solar, quill in hand, drafting ravens for each castle. He wrote to White Harbor, requesting additional archers to guard the North Road, to Moat Cailin, urging caution among the clans, to Storm's End, confirming that the Baratheon banners would remain in service through the cold months. Each seal pressed into wax carried his resolve. Unity, justice, preparation. He was halfway through his letters when a knock sounded at the door. Sir Roderick entered, cloak damp and breath steaming. "My lord's scouts have returned," he said, voice urgent. A column of riders approached from the east, not wildlings, but armored knights with banners unknown. John rose, heart tightening. "Did they bear arms?" "A dozen, sir. Heavy mail, plumed helms. They rode too fast for us to halt them, but they appeared unmolested." Roderick placed a rough map on the table. They turned north toward Carhold, not through the Crofters' hold. Men from Serwyn's woods reported them passing in the night. They. Joan's eyes flicked to the Godswood window, where a pale sliver of moon shone on the Weirwood's roots. "Banners unknown," he murmured. "They do not ride under the Stark Wolf." He folded his cloak and strode toward the door. "Ready my horse. Ghost walks." Within an hour, John led a dozen riders out the ice gate into the biting wind. Each man wore the direwolf crest and gripped spear or sword. The road to Carhold dipped into bleak valleys where the wind carried the stench of rot from half-frozen streams. Joan's breath burned his lungs, but he pressed on, imagining those unknown knights slipping through the north like shadows. When they reached the hamlet of Frostford, they found no banner but overturned wagons and slaughtered guards. Silver bowls lay shattered among tracks in the snow. Horses had been cut free to bleed out, their reins stained red. John dismounted, boots crunching in fresh powder, and knelt beside a fallen rider, his sigil a silver bear on green. Carhold, men.g. They had been caught unawares. "Track them," John ordered, rising. "Ghost, die." The dire wolf sniffed the air, then darted north along a faint trail. John followed on Silverstream as the night pressed deeper into the widow's woodland, where the trees bowed beneath snow's weight. The path led up a rise, and there, in a glade shadowed by pines, the 12 knights had made camp. Torches flickered pale in the gloom. The riders slept around a central fire, their horses tethered to felled trunks. John drew his sword and signaled his men to surround the camp. "No arrows," he whispered. We must learn who sent them. At his nod, Grey Tim seized the bannerless panoply of the nearest sleeping knight and tore open his breastplate. The sigil hidden beneath was a stag pierced by a lightning bolt, a device unknown in Winterfell. The knight awoke with a grunt, sword in hand, only to drop both at Jon's stern glare. "Who are you?" Jon demanded. The knight's eyes flickered with panic. "I serve House Connington, Lord Jon Connington of Griffin's Roost. We ride south to join Prince Rhaegar's host." Jon stiffened. Prince Rhaegar, a Targaryen heir long dead before the rebellion, had no living armies. "Rhaegar is dead," he growled. His line ended in the trident. The knight swallowed. "My lord served Rhaegar's son, the boy king at Storm's End. We ride for the rightful heir, to reclaim the Seven Kingdoms." Jon's hand tightened on the hilt. "So you ride through the north, terrorizing our roads under false pretenses." He withdrew Longclaw, its pale wolf-head pommel gleaming. "Swear fealty to House Stark, or face justice by sword." Connington's knight flinched as he beheld the blade. After a breath, he bowed. "I swear to serve House Stark, to obey your command, Lord Jon Snow." Jon held his gaze. "Then you ride with me back to Winterfell. And let it be known that any house claiming dragons through our lands must first pledge before the old gods." The knight rose and stepped forward, head bowed. Ghost padded around him in cautious circle. Jon nodded. "Bind them, then ride." They departed the glade as night's chill grew deeper, each rider thoughtful. Jon's mind raced. An attempted march by a Targaryen pretender. A covert bid for power. The North would not suffer such treachery. He urged Silverstream northward toward Winterfell's torches, a promise of trials and reckonings yet to come. By first light, they were within sight of the Ice Gate, its walls rising like a bastion of hope. Jon paused, Ghost at his side. In the pale winter sun, he could feel the weight of every vow he had made, and everyone yet to stand. The road ahead would not be free of shadows or storms, but Winterfell endured, and as long as its sons and daughters held fast, no pretender, raider, or wildling could topple its gates. He rode through the gate, steeled by purpose, Ghost padding close. Around him, Winterfell stirred to life beneath fresh snow. Tomorrow the domes of the godswood would witness his judgment on the challengers, and the gods themselves would bear witness to justice done. For now, Jon Snow had thwarted the first stirrings of rebellion in the north. And in the hush of winter's dawn, he vowed that no man would pass through his lands unbound by Stark law. The north would stand, unbroken, until the last wolf howled, and beyond. Ya. K. E. Jon guided his horse through the wide courtyard of Winterfell, as dawn's pale light crept over the battlements. Snow lay across the cobblestones in fugitive patches, and the torches lining the curtain wall still glowed with the last warmth of night. Ghost padded beside him, his white fur streaked with gray where the snow had melted into frost. Around them the castle stirred. Servants unbarred doors, stable hands led forth fresh mounts, and the new guard drilled in the yard, sending puffs of steam into the chill air with every command. Jon dismounted by the godswood's entrance, ignoring the summons of his steward that he attend the hall. Beneath the ancient boughs of the weirwood, the air lay quiet once more, a stark contrast to the bustle of Winterfell's heart. A faint wind stirred the blood-red leaves, and Jon felt the weight of every vow he had ever spoken settling upon him like a mantle. Here, he had made promises to the living, and to the dead whose faces were carved in the stone below the tree. Each oath demanded fulfillment, and each decision now echoed eternally in the North's fate. He knelt beside the knotted roots, where he had once buried a letter to his mother, and later, a vow of unity between Stark and Baratheon. Ghost settled in the snow at his side, ears pricked. Jon traced a finger over the pale bark, but his mind was already racing ahead. Today, he must preside over the trial by combat between House Serwyn and House Glover. A moment of ancient law, rare in its occurrence, but potent in its finality. And beyond that, he would see to the integration of the Connington Knights under House Stark's banner. testing whether old loyalties could yield to new bonds. "Jon," a voice called softly. He turned to see Sir Roderick Castle emerging from the shadows, frost glinting on his armor. "The knights of Serwyn and Glover await you in the courtyard. Their champions stand ready." Roderick's gauntlet tapped the hilt of his sword, a reminder that the old laws of the North were as sharp as steel. Jon rose. "Very well. Let us honor our traditions." He vaulted into the saddle and motioned Ghost to follow. Together, they crossed the snowy courtyard, hooves echoing like a heartbeat, until they stood before the assembled men-at-arms of both houses. A hush fell as he reined in and dismounted. Lord Serwyn's brother, Bran Serwyn, stood tall and menacing in his furs and plate, eyes cold beneath a tangled nest of silver hair. Across the courtyard, the Glover champion, Sir Jory Glover, a massive man whose green cloak was cinched tight with a wolf's fang of ivory, awaited with his greatsword in hand. Each knight bore the scars of winter's frost, and each man-at-arms flanked them in rigid lines of crimson and emerald. Jon regarded them both for a moment, longer than courtesy demanded, then spoke. "By the old laws of the North, this contest shall resolve the dispute between your houses. Sir Bran, Sir Jory, meet upon the frozen earth. No shield other than oath, no mercy except that which honor demands. May the gods, old and new, judge your cause." Sir Bran bowed, and Sir Jory stepped forward to meet him. The crowd drew back, forming a wide, empty circle. Jon ascended the dais steps to stand upon the lowest platform, the carved dire wolf at his side. Ghost settled at his feet, a silent witness. The clatter of arms sounded when the champions clasped gauntlets, and they circled each other, breath steaming in the frigid air. For a moment, it seemed neither would strike. Then Sir Bran lunged, the arc of his blade singing against Sir Jory's mail. The Glover knight countered, swinging his greatsword in a wide sweep that Sir Bran barely parried. Steel rang on steel, sparks spitting out to dance upon the snow. Jon watched, every muscle taut, as the two men tested one another's strength. Sir Bran pressed forward, forcing Sir Jory back step by step. "Doin do!" With a roar, he struck downward, and the greatsword clanged aside at the last instant, sending a shower of ice and metal flakes into the wind. Sir Jory recovered in a breath, planting his feet and slashing at Sir Bran's thigh. The blade bit hard, nicking the steel cuisse, but not flesh. Blood bloomed across Sir Bran's greave, and the knight snarled. Jon's voice rang out, "Honor your vows." Both men paused, chests heaving. In that heartbeat of stillness, Jon saw that each bore the same fierce fire in his eyes, a reflection of ancestral pride that resisted subjugation even by dire necessity. Then Sir Bran roared again and struck, a savage blow that cracked Sir Jory's gauntlet. The Glover knight dropped his sword, and Sir Bran seized the advantage, gripping the hilt of his rival's sword and driving them both down onto the snow. Sir Jory yielded under the weight, hand on his hilt, but subdued. He looked up, face white with cold and effort, and nodded once. Sir Bran released him. Jon descended the dais. "The contest is over. Sir Bran Serwyn prevails. House Serwyn's claim stands, until next we meet under different terms." The Serwyn men cheered. The Glover men bowed their heads. Sir Bran offered Sir Jory his gauntlet in solidarity. Sir Jory clasped it, and the two champions raised their joined fists for all to see. The dispute was laid to rest, its heat cooled by the singularity of combat and the unbending will of law. Jon mounted once more, his gaze sweeping over the courtyard's silent throng. "Let this be a reminder," he said, voice carrying, "that the North's laws are our shield when swords collide. Go, both your houses in peace." The banners of Glover and Serwyn fell into a calm drape, the green and crimson threads intertwining as the men returned to their pavilions. With that matter concluded, Jon turned his attention to the knights of House Connington, who had been quartered in the stables. Under Jon's orders, two representatives, Sir Tymet Talhart and Sir Rogad Baratheon, awaited him in the keep's annex. They wore the dire wolf crest, newly sewn upon their breastplates, the sun's first rays glinting off the metal. Jon studied their faces, young men hardened by war, but untested in the loyalty they had sworn. "You have pledged your fealty to House Stark," Jon said, voice low. "You have sworn to obey my commands and to defend these lands against any who would raise blade in treachery." Both knights lowered their heads. "My lord, we stand by our oath," Sir Tymet said. "We pledge ourselves to Winterfell's safety and the North's peace." Sir Robert Baratheon echoed the vow in equal measure. Jon nodded, then drew Longclaw, laying its hilt across his left palm. "Then receive your swords into the service of House Stark." He tapped each knight's shoulder with the blade, anointing them anew. "Rise, Sir Tymet, Sir Robert." They rose, kneeling to don their wolf-emblazoned cloaks. A murmur of approval rose from the gathered guards. Ghost padded forward, brushing against Sir Robert's leg, an unspoken blessing from the direwolf. Jon returned Longclaw to his belt. "You will accompany me to the wall when I depart. You will serve as my envoys to the Night's Watch and to the clans beyond. There is work yet to bind the North's defenses, and you shall see it done." "Da." Sir Tymet and Sir Robert bowed. "As you command, my lord." For a moment, the three men stood in the flickering torchlight, a trifecta of new blood sworn to an old house. Jon felt a spark of hope. If loyalty could be forged in this crucible, then the North's cause was secure. He dismissed them and descended the keep's stone steps into the courtyard once more. The day's councils awaited. Reports from the outlying villages, assessments of grain stores, updates on the wall's patrols. By midday he convened Maester Luwin, Catelyn, Grey Tim, and a council of trusted captains in the Solar. Maps were spread on the table, raven-marked routes stretching from the wall to the neck. From White Harbor to Storm's End, wildling raids have increased near Hardhome, Grey Tim reported. Their numbers swell like the tide. They press southward, testing the watch. He pointed to a cluster of ravens sent from Castle Black. Jon scrawled a note on a fresh scroll. "Send 50 cavalry and 100 longbowmen to reinforce the Shadow Tower patrols. Inform the watch that Baratheon and Tallheart men ride for the wall within the week." Maester Luwin nodded, sealing the missive with wax. Catelyn leaned forward, concern darkening her brow. "The villages along the western banks of the Bay of Ice fear sea raids. White Harbor's ships patrol, but winter storms will soon make passage impossible." She turned to Jon. "Lord Manderley can spare 2 longships if we secure his holdfast from the raiders along the coast." Jon tapped his fingers on the table. "Then we will secure White Harbor's hinterland first. Glover's levies can assist. After the festival feast this moon's end, I will ride to White Harbor personally." "Now," Grey Tim protested. "That means leaving Winterfell lightly held." Jon cut him off. "We have the new guard, the Serwyn Watch, and the Connington Knights sworn to our banners. It is enough." He met the captain's gaze. "If the North is to stand its heart, Winterfell must remain a beacon, not a fortress besieged." They spent another hour allocating forces, dispatching ravens, and planning patrols. When the council adjourned, Jon lingered at the table, staring at the intricate lines of the roads and rivers. Each path was a lifeline, and each lifeline must be defended. He pressed his palm to the parchment as if it could feel his conviction. That evening the great hall rang with laughter and music as Winterfell hosted the midwinter feast. The long tables were laden with roasted boar, root stews, fresh breads, and spiced ale. Lords and ladies from the Vale, the Manderleys from White Harbor, Tallheart and Glover bannermen, even a handful of subdued Connington knights now cloaked in winter white, gathered beneath the banners of House Stark. Torches flickered against the high arches, and a minstrel's harp wove a melody that rose above the clatter of tankards. Jon sat at the dais beside Catelyn and Sansa, observing with a measured pride. On his other side, Sir Tymet and Sir Robert exchanged nods of satisfaction. Ghost lay curled at his feet, dozing amid the merriment. The scent of pine boughs and burning stars, a decorative treat Catelyn had arranged, hung in the warm air. A flourish of trumpets announced the arrival of a guest. Sir Stedman Dustin, arriving from Barrowton with news. He bowed deeply before John. My lord, winter shipments have arrived at White Harbour's docks. Lord Manderley sends his thanks for Winterfell's dispatches and pledges, 2 ships to patrol the Bay of Ice until the snows fully close the harbor. He handed John a sealed scroll stamped with the merman's sigil. John broke the seal and scanned the contents. His lips curved into a faint smile. Tell Lord Manderley that we will hold White Harbour's land secure, and that Winterfell will welcome his ships back whenever the spring thaws. Dustin bowed again and retreated. Catelyn raised her horn. A toast to Lady Catelyn and Lord Jones' wisdom. May our alliances be as steadfast as the walls around us. The hall rose in unison, glasses lifted, and a roar of approval echoed against the stone. John tapped his glass lightly, voice low. To the north, to its people, and to unity in winter's dark. The hall answered with booming voices. As the feast wore on, John slipped away with Sansa to the Godswood's edge, seeking a moment's respite. The music throbbed distantly, and torches flared against the night sky. Beneath the weirwood, snow drifted against the pale trunk. Sansa tucked her cloak closer, her breath misting. You have done more in these few weeks than any lord in ages, she whispered. John shook his head. I have done what I must. The North's safety demands it. He gestured toward the distant torches. Tomorrow, I ride for White Harbour. Then I will return here before I set out for the Wall. Sansa's eyes flickered with worry. Be careful, she said. The sea roars in winter, and the roads are lonely. He squeezed her hand. And yet I ride, for the North's sake. She nodded, and for a moment they stood in silence. The winter wind weaving through the boughs. The promise of duty bound them more tightly than any oath, reminding John that home was worth every peril faced. As the horns of the feast faded, John returned to the hall to take up his place at the dais once more, prepared to guide Winterfell through the gathering storm. One choice, one oath, one victory at a time. Ga. John rode out before the sun, the sky still gray with winter's promise. Snowflakes drifted around him like pale embers, settling softly on Silverstream's coat and drifting onto Ghost's ears. He had bid farewell to Winterfell with only a small retinue. Sir Timet Tallheart, Sir Robert Baratheon, 2 veteran scout riders, and Maester Luwin's apprentice to carry messages back north. The bulk of his force remained behind to guard the walls and tend to the people. Only those sworn most faithfully had followed him to White Harbour's distant docks. The road east climbed steadily through pines, bowing under fresh snow. At times John paused to look back and glimpse the pale silhouette of Winterfell rising above the marshes, white towers vanishing in the mist. Each glimpse filled him with a fierce pride. His home stood unbowed, its hearths warm even as the world hardened into ice. By midday, they reached the fork in the road leading south to Last Hearth, and west, to White Harbour. John guided his horse leftward, following the slender valley of the White Knife River. Its waters dark beneath a thin sheet of fragile ice. The banks were quiet, no driftwood or footprints, but John ordered 2 scouts forward anyway, keen eyes roving for signs of trouble. Ghost padded beside him, nose flicking at every scent, every tremor of cold wind. At dusk they crossed the drawbridge of White Harbour, the great walls of the Manderleys looming above. Sea spray froze on the stone as waves crashed against the harbour's piers. Manderley banners, Bluefield with a leaping merman, fluttered in the wind, and lanterns hung from every parapet, a guard against winter's early night. John heard the cry of gulls and the clatter of hooves on wood as Carmanthe, Manderley's captain, greeted him on the quay. Welcome, my lord, Carmanthe said, bowing low. My lady mother awaits in the council chamber. John nodded, dismounting and passing reins to a stable hand. Ghost nuzzled forward, sniffing the salt-laden air. Inside the hall, Lady Wenda Manderley sat at the head of a long table, maps spread before her, and her steward at her side. She rose with grace, white hair bound in nets of silver. Jon Snow, she said, lifting a lantern so her face shone in its glow. I thank you for your counsel and your confidence. Jon inclined his head. Lady Wenda, White Harbour's ships ensure the North's lifeline through the Bay of Ice. I come to coordinate our defenses and to secure safe passage for your vessels, through winter's storms. Wenda frowned at the map, tracing her finger along the coastline. The sea grows treacherous. Ice floes drift into shipping lanes. Even our strongest cogs can be crushed. She tapped a wooden piece on the map. Daiwani. We must convoy in numbers, circle the bay at high tide, and time our departures with the westerlies. John studied her plan. Then I will dispatch scouts to Skagos to secure timber for pontoons. So we may beach smaller vessels inland if need be. And send word to Carhold to warn them off smugglers who prey on our weakened crews. He paused. And I ask that you lend 2 galleys to the Night's Watch for midwinter patrols north of the wall, to bring aid and mail to the Rangers. Wenda's gray eyes sharpened. The watch has long neglected the sea. I will send 3 vessels and a dozen oarsmen, Manderley Marines, to man them until the thaw. Now. Joan's face lit with relief. With your help, the wildlings will find no haven by sea, and the galleys will serve as our eyes upon the ice. They spent the evening planning routes, provisioning orders, and rallying the harbor's craftsmen to reinforce hulls against the drift ice. At midnight, John retired to the captain's quarters, setting pen to parchment to send word north, to Rob in the Riverlands, to Caitlin in Winterfell, to the wall itself. He sealed the letters and entrusted them to the apprentice maester, whose pale cheeks glowed with purpose at his task. The journey back to Winterfell took 4 days of relentless riding. Storm clouds gathered, and the wind stung at their faces as they passed through villages that lit torches to guide their path. Ghosts scoured the hedgerows for threats. The scouts drove off 2 small bands of smugglers who preyed on traders, binding them beneath the snow as a warning. On the 5th dawn, Winterfell's turrets rose against a bruised sky, the gates opening wide. Grey Tim awaited at the drawbridge, relaying news. The trial at Last Hearth had ended with peace. Barroton had pledged ships to the cause, and every village along the Roserad now flew the wolf banner, a sign of unity in the north. John reined in before the courtyard, dismounted, and felt Ghost slip free of his cloak. Servants and guards bowed as he passed. Caitlin and Sansa met him at the Iron Throne's predecessor, the simple days where a lord of Winterfell took counsel. Bran peered at him from the steps of the Godswood, eyes bright. "Brother," Bran called, and John climbed the steps to embrace him. Winterfell's walls felt warmer than the hearths within. Inside the great hall, the banners of Connington now hung beneath the dire wolf, a testament to vows kept. John greeted each lord in turn, hearing rumors of renewed harvests in the greenhouses and new patrols along the bayshore. That night, a great council gathered. Around the table sat the leaders of the Vale, the North, and the Manderleys, joined by representatives from Storm's End who had ridden north by Raven. John stood at the head of the table, long claw sheathed but within reach. "We have fortified our borders," he began. "White Harbor guards our seas. Last Hearth watches the western passes. Storm's End's galleys patrol the bay. The wall's patrols extend east and west with Manderley ships, yet winter drives us inward. We must next turn to our stores. I propose a central granary to collect surplus grain and a stockpile of firewood in every hole." He paused, letting his words sink in. Lord Aaron of the Vale nodded gravely. "The storm clouds darken, but with unity, we shall endure. The Vale will share our winter alms in exchange for passage through our mountain roads." "Nando." Lady Wenda leaned forward. "And White Harbor will supply fish to every keep along the coast, that no family starve through the snows." From Storm's End came a deep voice. "Baratheon ships will carry those stocks south in spring, that our allies beyond the Neck may remember the North's kindness." Caitlin added, "The wildling threat remains. We must reinforce the Shadow Tower and coordinate signals along the wall, beacons lit from Fellwood to Eastwatch." Jon rose. "Then, it is decided. We bind our resources, grain, fish, wood, ships, into a network of defense. When winter's fiercest winds howl at our gates, we shall stand as one. And when spring comes, we will emerge stronger." Bah! The council's assent was solemn and true. In that hall, beneath the carved rafters, the North had spoken as a single realm. Ghost lay at Jon's feet, muzzle resting on his boot, and Jon felt the weight of his vows lighten beneath the promise of shared purpose. Spring crept in on hesitant wings, thawing the snow from Winterfell's stones and filling the air with the promise of renewal. Jon oversaw the distribution of seeds to every farm, the planting of tubers in warmed beds, and the repair of roads that ran muddy with thaw. The Manderleys dispatched smiths to reinforce the keel of the vessels. Tallheart men rebuilt the Fournoy Bridge. Baratheon knights drilled with the recruits in the yard. Jon's own journeys continued, to Last Hearth, to White Harbor, to the Wall's Gates, and even twice by ship to Storm's End, where he inspected battering rams and reinforced towers. Each journey widened his understanding of his realm and deepened the bonds forged in winter's crucible. In Winterfell's Godswood one dawn, Sansa found him kneeling before the weirwood. "You have done more than any lord before you," she said softly. Jon rose, dusting snow from his cloak. "I have only done my duty." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "But the North's duty is a burden we share." Ghost padded up, nuzzling Sansa's hand in silent greeting. Together, the three of them stood beneath the red leaves. A family made strong by hardship. When the final raven returned from Castle Black with a plea for reinforcements and news of a gathering wildling host beyond the haunted forest, Jon convened his captains in the Solar. "We ride once more," he said, voice steady. "Not as scattered lords, but as one host of the North." He rolled out the map, tracing the route he would take with Jon Connington's now Stark knights at his flank, Baratheon cavalry on his rear guard, and Tallheart archers patrolling the flanks. "We meet the wildlings south of the Wall. We push them back. And we signal Castle Black, with our horns and fires, that the North stands behind every sworn brother." The captains rose, swords in hand, eyes lit with fervor. Roderick Castle placed a gauntlet against the map. "At your command, my lord." Grey Tim nodded. "For the North." Jon sheathed Longclaw. "Then let us ride." Outside, the dawn's light broke clear across the snow, the world alight with possibility. The North gathered at Winterfell's gates, and Jon Snow, once a bastard, once a brother of the Black, rode at the head of his army, the Wolf of Winterfell, and a watcher on all the walls of ice and hearth. As the columns moved out into the awakening land, Ghost led the way, every pawprint marking the path of unity and strength that Jon had forged in the long night, and would carry forward into the bright days to come. Jon led the might of the North out of Winterfell's gates in the sharp dawn air, Ghost at his side and banners snapping in the cold wind. The escort numbered no less than 3,000 strong. Stark men-at-arms in wolf-emblazoned mail, Baratheon knights still sworn to his pledge, Tallheart archers guarding the flanks, and the newly sworn Connington veterans fresh from the challenge in the pines. Winterfell's servants and villagers lined the walls to bid them farewell, offering bread and salt to the departing host, casting prayers and hopeful glances as the column wound its way northeast toward the Wall. The first day's march was steady and unhurried, through forests heavy with last night's snow. Jon rode near the front, often dismounting to greet a weary footman, or steady a stumbling horse. The soldiers, though stiff from the long season's drill, marched in good cheer, warmed by the promise of purpose. In each small village they passed, Ridgewood, Ridgewater, Coldstream, they left behind stocked pantries and earnest vows of protection, a chain of goodwill that stretched ever northward. That first evening, they camped beside the broad floodplain of the White Knife. Bonfires flared between tents, horses were stabled in makeshift paddocks, and the air rang with the clang of the forge fires as armorers repaired dents and sharpened blades. Jon walked among the sentries, his cloak drawn tight, speaking quietly with commanders about the morrow's plans. He studied the pale heavens, where clouds clung close to touch, and thought on the watchers at Castle Black, huddled in ice and wind at the edge of the world, waiting for this day's dawning. At dawn, they resumed the march. The road curled through ancient woodlands, rising steadily toward the foothills that lay beneath the Wall. The forest grew sparse here, pines replaced by dark wind-blasted birches. Snow deepened to knee-height, slowing their passage. Scouts began breaking trail ahead, tossing branches aside. Tents were folded for stage travel, and the column single-filed, where the road narrowed into a squash of ice and granite. By the third day, they reached the base of the wall itself. A vast vertical expanse of gleaming ice, soaring 300 feet into the air, crowned with crenellations and studded with towers. Jon halted and dismounted, his heart soaring at the sight that once had seemed myth to him. Ghost padded to the foot of the ice, sniffing the base as though challenging it to stand. Beyond the wall lay the stark banners of Castle Black's castle, faint but resolute. They approached the gate at the night fort, sealed by ancient iron bolts. Jon called to the sentries above, and within moments a booming horn echoed from atop the wall. A section of the gate slid open a span, revealing a chill gust of air that rushed down, carrying the scent of blood and wood smoke. Jon passed through on horseback, Ghost vaulting over the threshold, with a grace that drew shouts from the Black brothers gathered there. Sir Roderick Castle dismounted beside him with Grey Tim and a handful of northerners, their cloaks dusted white. "My lord," Roderick said, voice muffled in snow, "the watch is grateful. They thought your host would never come." Jon returned the words roughly in his throat. "Winterfell stands behind every vow made at Castle Black. Let them know. Let them see." He dismounted in the inner courtyard, ghostly towers looming above. The men of the Night's Watch, clad in black furs and mail, lined the walls and yard, faces wrought with surprise and relief. Some whispered, "Jon Snow returns with half a kingdom at his back." Others murmured, "The South remembers us after all." At the highest parapet, atop a tower crowned with black granite, stood Commander Lard Tollet, his wide shoulders hunched against the wind. Beside him, First Ranger Denise Hay peered south. When Jon raised his hand, Tollet strode to the battlements, the ivory dragonglass hilt of his sword glinting. He boomed across the courtyard, "Lord Snow of Winterfell brings aid to the watch." Pain and pride warred in Jon's chest as he watched Tollet kneel, helmet off, to accept his salute. Jon raised a reply, voice clear. "The North remembers its vows." The watch's horns answered in a low lament, rousing echoes among the frozen hills. Jon climbed the winding stairs to the summit of the wall, Ghost by his side. The wind buffeted him as he stepped onto the snowy battlements. Around him the land fell away into endless pines and ridges, the faint shapes of villages like clots of smoke on the horizon. To the north, the Night's Watch had set flaming barrels at every tower, a necklace of fire that glowed in the snow. This tithe of light struck Jon's heart like dawn, a testament of unity from all the scattered watchposts. Commander Tollet joined him at the edge, and Jon nodded. "The wildling hordes press upon the Shadow Tower fields. I have 3,000 men at my back. We ride north tomorrow at dawn to meet them before they breach the wall's talons." Tollet's eyes gleamed. "Your word carries the wall's fate, Lord Snow. We will ride with you. 500 sworn blades. And if more can muster from beyond the gates, they will rally under your banner." "Now." Jon grasped Tollet's forearm. "Then we march together. The old bears will be honored, and the Night's Watch restored as true guardians of the North." Ghost snarled low at the wind, and Jon glanced at the white wolf as though seeking counsel. A horn sounded. Sharp, urgent. A scout's banner fluttered from the South Watch tower. Tollet turned. "They come," he said. "First watch reports by dawn the wildling host will reach the broken tower." Jon inhaled the frigid air as though drawing steel into his lungs. "Then we make ready. Gather all my captains. We ride on the 6-hour tide." They descended from the wall into the yawning courtyard, serried soldiers already forming ranks in the falling snow. Tents were struck, wagons sealed, and fresh grim determination settled on every soldier's face. Maester Luwin moved among them, distributing rations and marking names on muster rolls. Jon found him in the yard center. "Maester," Jon said. "See that every man is supplied for 2 days' ride. Hardtack, jerky, ale in skins. The watch stores I brought south. Make sure no one lacks. Lewin bowed. At once, my lord. Roderick Castle approached with Grey Tim. My lord, the men have sentries posted. Weapons cleaned. They will follow your lead. Jon clasped Roderick's shoulder. Good. Remind them this night is for rest. For prayers to every god we know, and for quiet resolve. At first light, we ride north to meet them. Jon found Tolette near the gate. The commander's breath steamed as they spoke. The broken tower lies a day's ride north. They say the host numbers near 2,000, wildling clans, skinchangers, giants, wargs. Tolette frowned. Their numbers pale beside ours, but they fight with feral zeal. Jon nodded. Then we hold them at the broken tower, where the fields narrow, and the wall's cliffs block their flank. We make our stand there, and push them back south of the wall. None shall breach. Tolette's grip tightened. We will stand with you, Lord Snow. Jon placed his hand on the knight's gauntlet. Together. The dawn broke in rising wind, blood-pink light kissing the icy spires of the wall. The combined host mustered in the lee of the broken tower. Snow swirling around shield walls and pikes. Baratheon knights on heavier horses formed the core, their black armor luminous against the white landscape. Stark levies, mostly archers and spearmen, bracketed them, Targaryen exiles now recloaked as Stark men guarding winter's border. Tallheart archers took the ridges on either side, their feet braced in snow. Wildling captives, bound and hooded, stooped in rows at the camp's edge. Beyond the ring, the tension grew as the wildlings gathered. Roaming clansmen with crude weapons, warg riders on wolfbacks perched on drifted banks, a handful of giants looming hulking at the rear, and at their center, Ygritte's brother Rab stirring his warriors. He raised a war horn, its blast echoing like a beast's roar. Pipes of bone and wood joined in, and the wildling host began to stir. Banners of red flannel and furs snapping, rifles of bronze tipped with bone-cleaving glints. Jon led the head of his formation forward. Shield raised. Watch the signal, he called to his captains. Roderick Castle gripped his sword. Steady, my lord. Grey Tim muttered a prayer. A single horn blast came from Castle Black's Eastwatch tower. Sharp, urgent, then silent. It was Jon's sign. At once, Tallheart archers loosed a volley into the wildlings' front line. Arrows hissing through the air, felling men and direwolves alike. Wildlings roared and surged forward, shoving with shields and brandishing axes. Baratheon knights beat in with lances, charging into fur-clad ranks, metal crashing on bone. Stark spearmen braced behind a line of pikes, arms locked like the teeth of a saw, and drove back wargs and clansmen. Ygritte's own arrow struck Jon's gauntlet as he raised long claw, steel singing as he cut down an attacker closing fast. The field became chaos incarnate. Horses reared in the wind, screams rang hollow, the dead piled shallow in snow. Giants strode forward with clubs raised, smashing shields and scattering archers. Ser Robert Baratheon wheeled to meet one, shield clattering beneath the blow. Jon spurred into the fray, Longclaw flashing arcs of brilliance, clearing a path through the tumult toward Rab. Ghost bounded beside him, fangs bared, driving wolves away. The wildling chief saw Jon through a flurry of axes and raised his own. They clashed steel, each hammering the other's blade into the snow. Jon twisted free of Rab's reach, severing the leather strap of his axe, and forced the clansman back with a strike that rang in the still air. At that moment, the Eastwatch horn sounded again, a series of 3 blasts. From the wall's summit, a throng of Night's Watchmen descended ropes, reinforcements clad in black furs, dragging with them the wall's own battering rams and horse collars. Seeing fresh ranks behind them, the wildlings faltered. Giants turned, axes raised to their chests, and fled back into the woods. Wargs carried their packs in retreat, axes lowered. The clansmen screamed in pain and anger as archers loosed another hail of shafts, and the ranks broke. Jon looked around as the tide turned. His men rallied, shields reformed, and pressed the advantage. Sir Roderick pursued fleeing wargs. Grey Tim gathered prisoners into ties. Stark spearmen held the line until the last wildling had vanished into the pines. Silence fell, settling over the field like a shroud. In the hush, the battered soldiers of the north let out a cry. Soft at first, then mounting until it shook the ice. Jon sheathed Longclaw and dismounted, kneeling on the frozen earth amid fallen bodies. He looked at the broken weapons, the stained shields, the faces of those who lived and those who had perished. He stood slowly, torch in hand, and walked among them, calling for chants of the old gods, for prayers to the weaver and the smith, for blessings upon every man who had stood with him. When he rose at the field's edge, Commander Tollet and Jon Connington joined him, clad in frost and honor. Tollet knelt, bowing his head before Jon. "You saved the wall today, Lord Snow," he said. "Your name will be sung by every brother here." Jon placed a hand on the commander's shoulder. "We saved the North. The watch stands because the North remembers." Jon Connington's eyes glimmered in the firelight. "And I have a new home to defend now." Ghost leapt up, brushing against Jon's leg, and Jon smiled. A fierce, weathered smile. Above them, the wall rose like a monument to their victory. Ropes were being hauled back, gates bolted, and lanterns lit to guide the returning watchmen. Jon allowed himself a moment to look northward into the haunted forests, then turned south toward Winterfell, where Catelyn, Sansa, and Bran would be awaiting word of battle. He raised hand in salute to the wall's highest tower, and the horn answered. Their task at the broken tower done, Jon's host began the march back to Winterfell, hurrying to share word of victory, and of the unity forged in snow and steel. Each village they passed raised its banner higher. Each household brought forth provisions in celebration. At Winterfell's gates, they were met with cheers so fierce that mallets pounding the walls rang a jubilant thunder. Catelyn's tears glistened in the torchlight as she embraced Jon. Sansa's laughter rang high above the crowd. Bran leaned forward on his crutches, eyes alight with pride. Jon dismounted, Ghost at his side, and all at once felt the world's weight lift. Winter had tested them, the wall had thundered, and the wildling tide had been held. The North stood unbroken. Jon Snow, Lord of Winterfell and bastard no more, had delivered his people from the long night's threat, and had bound them together in a unity that would outlast any winter. That night, the hall of Winterfell burned bright with fires and song, and Jon's chalice brimmed with spiced wine as lords and knights drank his health and the enduring promise of the North. And now one day, the great hall of Winterfell had not known such celebration in living memory. Torches guttered against the heavy stone, banners of green and crimson and black hanging triumphant between the carved beams, and the voices of hundreds rose in song and laughter. At the head table, Jon Snow sat between his mother and sister, cups of spiced wine and tankards of ale piled before him, but he drank little. His gaze constantly roved the crowd, Sir Timet and Sir Robert at his right, newly anointed knights of Winterfell, Maester Luwin's apprentice scurrying past with trays of bread, Grey Tim rallying archers fresh from the wall, and beyond them, the tall figures of Connington knights clad in wolf-emblazoned cloaks. Catelyn leaned in, her voice almost lost in the roar. "You have given them hope, Jon," she said, eyes bright. "They believe again." He inclined his head. "They have believed all along, Mother. I merely reminded them." Sansa brushed a fingertip across his knuckles. "And they will follow you anywhere." Her smile was soft. Jon returned it, though his mind was already turning to tomorrow's task. For while the feast raged, the far-off dangers of the North had only been postponed. Scouts returning from Carhold reported smuggler bands growing bolder, emboldened by rumors of Winterfell's hosts at the wall. Ironborn raiders, too, had struck along the southern reaches of the Bay of Seals, sacking a fishing village called Fistfall and kidnapping nearly 24 fishermen for ransom. Beyond the wall, reports of restless wildling survivors and a strange new tribe of iceborn clansmen crept into the Ravensong. Jon knew the long summer's peace would not return easily. When the horn finally blew across the courtyard, dismissing lords and rangers to their tents, Jon slipped away with Roderick Castle and Grey Tim. He found them in the yard, leaning on their swords beneath the moon's pale light. Ghost padded between them, silent as stone. "We ride for the fingers at first light," Jon said. "The Ironborn raiders have taken Fistfall and hollowed the village. We must strike them before they reach the narrow channel. Then..." Roderick's mouth twisted. "Ironborn scour us like crabs on the shore. They will not face us in open field. Then we will lure them," Jon replied. "We will feign a convoy of merchant wagons and bait them into the causeway near Deepwood Creek. Tallheart archers and Glover spearmen will wait in ambush." Grey Tim nodded. "I will see the wagons loaded with false grain and salted fish. They'll swarm in for pillage and never see the archers' arrows until it's too late." "Good," Jon said. "And I will ride north of the bay to meet Lord Manderley's ships. They await my orders at White Harbor. We will blockade the channel until the raiders are routed." He paused. "Send word to Lord Glover and Lord Dustin. Their levies will join us at Dawn's Reach." And thus, before sleep claimed him, Jon walked the battlements and sent his captains to marshal the forces of the North once more. The wall had been the first test, now the sea would be the second. The dawn was mist-shrouded and cold, as Jon rode from Winterfell with Sir Tymet and a small party of knights, headed west along the Roserad to collect the companies pledged by Glover and Dustin. The fields lay white and silent. The wind carried the faint scent of salt on a distant current, promising the sea. Jon's thoughts dwelled on the Ironborn, their long ships slicing through waves, the cold bite of iron axes, the terror of coastal folk woken in the night. It was easy to imagine the raid in detail, but harder to predict their cunning. At Last Hearth, Lord Tallheart's men stood ready, bowstrings taut. At the Crofters' Hold, a contingent of Glover spearmen joined their ranks. Together, they marched south to the marshy flats, where Deepwood Creek bridged the coastal road. As they approached, Jon dismounted to survey the ground. Tangled reeds, a single rutted causeway, shallow pools of brackish water. He placed markers for the archers and knights, whispering instructions. By midday, the false convoy rolled into view. Wagons laden with barrels of flour and salted fish, driven by peasant proxies and escorted only lightly. No banners flew. Only the scent of grain and the clatter of wheels announced their passage. At the creek's mouth, Ironborn longships grounded on the shore, and raiders in patched leathers surged forward, axes glinting. They shouted a guttural welcome, hungry for plunder. Then the arrow flight began. Hundreds of shafts zipped across the mud, felling raiders before they could close. Spears flashed from the pikes lining the causeway, driving the survivors into the shallow water. The longship's oars clattered as Ironborn thralls tried to repel the ambush, but reinforcements poured from the tree line. Baratheon cavalry charging down the muddy slopes, Sir Tymet and Stark knights leaping the creek on their mounts, steel ringing. Jon led a second wave, Longclaw cleaving through shields, Ghost at his side scattering wargs who had been brought as hounds. The fight was fierce, but swift. The Ironborn, taken by surprise and flanked, broke ranks. Many fled back to their boats, which slipped off the shore before the Northmen could seize them. Others surrendered under the promise of quarter. By dusk, the creek had run red, the mud churned, and the shore dark with broken shields. Jon stood on the bank, rain misting the air, and watched Lord Glover's men secure the longship's hulls. In the shallow surf, Grey Tim gathered staves and set them to flame, a signal of victory carried seaward. As the flames crackled, Jon turned toward Winterfell, resolved to bring every last raider to answer for their crimes. The sea was no longer safe for them, nor for any who believed they could slip into the north under the cloak of winter's storm. 2 days later, Jon's forces returned to Winterfell with Ironborn captives bound in ropes, longships lashed together as makeshift barges, and an arsenal of axes collected as trophies. The captives knelt before the dais in the courtyard, their tattoos and sea-bleached hair marking them as Saltborn. Jon mounted at the summit, Ghost at his side, and addressed them under the eyes of every northern banner. "You came to feast upon our people's fear," he said, voice clear. "You found instead the steel of House Stark, the arrows of Tallheart, the spears of Glover, and the fury of Winterfell. For every man you bound, every hearth you sacked, every child you terrorized, justice will be done." He nodded to Sir Roderick. "Carry out the sentence." The courtyard fell silent as the Ironborn were led to the scaffold by Dustin's knightly retinue. In Winterfell's name, the sentence was carried out swiftly, an unflinching reminder that the North's law held as tightly by the sea as by the wall. When the echoes had died, Jon rode again to the Godswood, the air still fragrant of wood smoke. Beneath the weirwood's face, he laid a hand on the bark and silently vowed to guard no fewer miles of coast or wildwood than he had along the wall. Winter was deep, but the North's borders were no less sacred. The months that followed blurred in a relentless rhythm of vigilance. Scouts patrolled the marshes for smugglers. Messengers rode south to Storm's End and east to White Harbor. Stone cairn forges produced weapons for archers bound for the wall. Granaries were filled against another lean year, and the black-robed brothers of the Knights watch-rowed armed ships across frozen bays to guard the wall's waters. At Winterfell, Catelyn presided over winter courts. Roderick trained the new guard, and Sansa oversaw the weaving of furs and the mending of sails for the Manderley ships. Even Bran, confined to the Godswood, found purpose in sending scouts north on ghosts back to gather news among the clans. Jon himself moved between these courts like a restless wolf. He spent days in the solar poring over maps of holdfasts and rivers, and nights in the Godswood praying silent prayers before the weirwood. Letters from Robb arrived with news of war in the Riverlands, victory tempered by hard losses, and Jon answered them with counsel on supply lines and the promise of northern steel if the Reach joined their cause. A single raven from King's Landing spoke of uneasy truce between the young king and his mother's regents. Jon archived it, uncertain whether it foretold alliance or threat. When the Raven's call, a formal summons by Raven, arrived from King's Landing, Jon gathered his council. The Raven's seal bore the trio of dragons, but the message was curt. "Lord Snow of Winterfell, in recognition of your deeds in defense of the realm, you are summoned to the small council to advise on the defense of the realm's coasts and borders." Catelyn's eyes narrowed. "To go south among the lions? The roads are fraught, and the capital is no friend to northerners." Sansa stood. "But if we refuse, they will suspect we bear arms for ourselves, not for the realm." Roderick Castle spoke with gravelly voice. "I will swear myself to your side, my lord, and ride as your shield." Jon folded the letter. "I will go, but not alone. I ride with Sir Temet and Sir Robert and Maester Luwin, and I take 2 ships from White Harbor, both for swift passage and for security." He looked across the council to Catelyn. "Stay here. Keep Winterfell safe. I ride south to keep the North's voice in the realm's defense." Benper. She drew a steady breath, pride tempered by fear. "Go with the North's blessing." And so, in early spring's thaw, Jon prepared Greywind, the dragonless Draman from White Harbor, while Ghost padded on deck beside him. Sir Temet and Sir Robert stood guard, Luwin with dispatches for the wall and for Robb. On the morning of departure, the winds lay fair, and the bay was calm as they passed beneath Winterfell's shadows, the dire wolf banner snapping in salute. Catelyn and Sansa stood on the quay, Bran leaning on his crutches, eyes bright with resolve and sorrow. Jon called out, voice carried by the salt breeze, "I carry the North's honor with me. I will return with its safety secured." The ships cast off, oars cutting through the silver waters, and as they headed south along the craggy coast, Jon Snow, the Wolf King of Winterfell, felt the weight of every vow he had made. To guard the wall, to secure the sea, to hold the North together through winter's long night. Ahead lay courts of stone and councils of power, plots woven in shadow, and alliances yet untested. But he was no longer the lone bastard on the wall's winds. He was Jon Snow, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North's coasts, Keeper of the Peace, and the realm would know his name. And so, beneath the banners of the wolf and the winds of the narrow sea, his next journey began. Jon stood at the prow of the Draman, the salt wind tearing at his dark hair, as White Harbor's gray cliffs slipped past on his port side. The sun, pale through a haze of spring rain, flickered tentatively on the rippling surface of the narrow sea. Below him, Ghost patted on the deckboards, inscrutable eyes watching the foaming wake. Sir Timet Talhart and Sir Robert Baratheon rode aft, swords sheathed, but hands never far from their hilts, while Maester Luwin busied himself with a sheaf of dispatches and raven quills. The wind shifts, Timet observed, tugging on his cloak. A gale may strike by nightfall. He glanced at the low-hanging clouds. Best we make port at Dragonstone before it turns foul. Jon turned his gaze southward, toward the looming silhouette of Dragonstone's volcanic spires. A prudent course, he agreed. We must present ourselves to the hand of the king, not the salt and spray. Steady on. He signaled the helmsman, who adjusted the oarsman's strokes, angling the prow toward the shadowed rock. They arrived by midday beneath heavy skies. The fortress rose like a dark crown above a churning sea, its walls scarred by ancient battle and restless tides. Small longships, White Harbor's gift to the wall, clustered in the harbor alongside Ion Volantis's merchant galleys and a few royal pinnaces. Soldiers in steel and mail stood on the quay, their sigils half familiar. Sons of Tarth, tridents of the Valyrians, twin falcons of the Reach. Jon disembarked with Ghost at his side, the courtyard slippery with seaweed and rain. A high-born knight in black and red bore a missive. Lord Jon Snow, of Winterfell, he intoned. The hand of the king bids you to his presence in the council chambers. He bowed stiffly, then withdrew. Jon nodded once, sealing the moment. Catelyn's blessing, Sansa's pride, Bran's quiet strength. They rode with him still, as surely as the direwolf strapped to his hip. Inside the cold corridors of Dragonstone, carved from black basalt and echoing with dripping water, Jon pressed a hand to the slick wall. The air smelled of salt and ink and the faint tinge of menace. Maester Luwin's apprentice lagged behind, parchments tucked beneath his arm, glancing fearfully at the tapestries of dragons and fire. Sir Timet and Sir Robert walked just behind, scanning the flickering torches for hidden blades. They came at last to the council chambers, a lofty hall of arched ceilings, stained green windows, and a dais of basalt stone. The Hand, Lord Corlys Velaryon, sat at the center, flanked by Sir Hightower in white and gold and Master of Coin Grafton, his ledger opened. King's Landing envoys, Knights of the Rose and Lions of the Rock, stood along the rear wall, shields sheathed, but presence unmistakable. The Hand's silver hair and sea-blue eyes regarded Jon with a curious intensity. "Lord Snow," Velaryon began, voice cool as the sea, "you arrive with royal summons and with your own might behind you. I welcome you, though I confess to surprise." He gestured to a seat of dark wood. "Pray sit. We have much to discuss." Jon inclined his head and sat. Ghost left outside, under Sir Timet's watch. He laid his cloak aside, revealing the direwolf's crest beneath. "My Lord Hand, I come at the North's behest. I am summoned not as a rebel, but as a partner in the realm's defense." He looked around the chamber. "I bring the Night's Watch's galleys, the wall's gleaners, and the sea's loyalty. I have routed raiders, subdued wildlings, and held my vows. I seek counsel on how best to guard coast and shore against threats both foreign and domestic." Then now, Lord Grafton's black eyes flicked over the documents. "The treasury strains under war and winter relief. Funding new fleets and fortifications will require coin beyond what the old coffers possess." He tapped a chart of expenses. "We pay for Storm's End's galleys, the Reach Knights on the road, and the Vale's food convoys. Soon, Lord Snow, your own requests will further deplete the purse." Jon nodded. "Then let us craft levies and subsidies that tap into the North's strengths. Fishing rights can be taxed, coastal tolls can be raised on trade, and the Ironborn's ransom can fill the coffers once they are banished from our shores." He drew a heavy breath. "I will not ask for more than the North can give, nor will I ask it give for free when its own people starve." The chamber's hush deepened until the Hand leaned forward. "Your proposals have merit, and yet the realm is unsteady. Reports from Dorne speak of unrest, from the Reach of noble houses vying for sway, from the crownlands of shadows in the Red Keep." His gaze settled on Jon. "We need your men at the Fingers, at White Harbor, at Storm's End. And yet you also command the wall's aid. Your reach is vast, Lord Snow. Jon met his gaze steadily. The north is my charge. I will stand wherever it is threatened. We can coordinate watches. White Harbor ships patrol the bay. Iron Island's embargo maintained by joint fleets. Storm's End's knights hold the docks. And the wall, my north wall, extends across sea and land alike. I will bind them as I have bound my own lords. Valyrian's nod was a tide's ebb. Then so be it. We establish a council of maritime defense, led by you, with representatives from each region. The Reach, the Stormlands, the Vale, the Westerlands, the Crownlands, the Iron Islands exiled, and the North. You will allocate duties and convoys, determine fortifications, and oversee any northern levies called for the wall. Then now, Jon's chest tightened with the gravity of power. I accept with gratitude. I will return to Winterfell with instructions so the ships sail, the knights ride, and the packs hold. Sir Hightower cleared his throat. We will draft the commission at once. This council meets at the Hands Keep on Dragonstone within the week. He tapped a scroll. And the king himself must consent. Jon inclined his head. Then let us send for the king's word. I will remain until he arrives. Outside the basalt walls, rain fell in cold sheets. Jon paused on the battlements, looking out over the roiling sea, the jagged island cliffs, and the road south to King's Landing. Below, the Hands banners snapped in the wind, a promise of alliance held firm against storm and spray. He thought of Winterfell's hearth, of Catelyn's quiet strength, of Sansa's growing grace, of Bran's serene wisdom. He thought of the wall's black brothers, of the wildling pines beyond, of the Ironborn's broken ships on the coast. All of these places were pieces of the realm he served. He turned from the sea and made for his chambers, mind already plotting the long ride back north. The salt wind gnawed at his cloak, but within him burned a steadier flame, the Wolf King's oath to guard every shore, to keep the North's shields ever raised, and to bind the Seven Kingdoms in fragile unity against the darkness that always lurked beyond the next horizon. His journey had taken him from Winterfell's crowning towers to Dragonstow's black basalt, and it would carry him next to courts of intrigue, to the Red Keep's golden haze, and back again to the white gates of home. For now, he was Lord Snow of Winterfell, Warden of the North's coasts, Admiral of the Wall's fleets, and sworn partner in the realm's defense. And as the storm howled across the narrow sea, Jon Snow knew with certainty that he would keep his vows, whatever the tides might bring. Oh, hey. And how? Jon Snow stood atop the terrace of Dragonstone as dawn's first light bled through roiling gray clouds. Beneath him, the narrow sea heaved in restless surf, its dark swells crashing against the volcanic cliffs. The air still carried a biting salt, and every gust of wind seemed charged with the countless secrets of the deep. Ghost padded at his heels, ears pricked against the rising wind, and Sir Temet Tallheart and Sir Robert Baratheon moved to flank him, swords sheathed but eyes ever watchful. Behind them, the Hands banners fluttered listlessly in the breeze. Within the black basalt walls of Dragonstone, Jon had forged the charter for the Maritime Council, binding the North, the Reach, the Stormlands, the Vale, and the exiled Ironborn together in uneasy alliance. The king's own envoy, Sir Mandon Hightower, had borne the royal seal confirming their authority. By midday they would summon the council's first assembly beneath Dragonstone's vaulted hall. But now, on this wind-swept terrace, Jon allowed himself a moment of stillness before the tumult of politics and council proceedings resumed. Will the king come? Sir Robert's voice broke the hush, gravelly and cautious. Jon's gaze turned south, toward the hazy horizon and the distant towers of King's Landing, barely visible through shifting mist. He may, or he may send a small delegation, he replied. Queen Mother Alicent holds sway in the capital, and her trust in a northern lord may be tempered by old rumors and cold memories. Sir Temet snorted. Let her come. Let her see that the wolf is at the water's edge. Jon gave a faint, wry curl of his lips. She will see. And if she does not come, the council proceeds without her. We have no time to wait on courtiers too timid to face the sea winds. They fell silent again as the sun finally broke through the overcast, sending shallow shafts of light dancing on the sea. Far below, a line of sails emerged, triangular and white, gliding up the channel toward Dragonstow's harbor. Jon tightened his cloak and turned toward the stairway leading back into the fortress. "The king's envoy," he said quietly. "And perhaps the king himself." Hours later, the council assembled in the great hall, an echoing chamber carved from black basalt, lit by flickering braziers and the faint glow of magma veins running through the walls. At one end stood the high table, where Jon occupied the center seat, flanked by Lord Corlys Velaryon on his right and Lord Spear of Highgarden on his left. Behind them, representatives from each region stood guard, banners rippling softly in the heated air. Sir Otto Hightower entered first, his bearing formal, the Hightower lantern sigil gleaming on his chest. He bowed stiffly to the hand, then inclined his head to Jon. "My Lord Snow, on behalf of His Grace King Viserys, I bid you welcome and thank you for your zeal in securing the realm's coasts." Jon inclined his head. "I serve the North and the Seven Kingdoms alike. May our work here strengthen both." One by one, the councillors presented their reports. Lord Spear detailed efforts to reinforce Storm's End's watchtowers. Lady Melissa Tarley outlined the deployment of Dornish shipwrights to repair White Harbor's hulls. Lord John Royce described the Vale's construction of signal beacons along the Fingers. Each address built upon the last, weaving a tapestry of shared responsibility. At last, Sir Otto Hightower cleared his throat. "His Grace the King will join us presently. Until then, may I propose we ratify the Council's Articles of Mutual Defense, that our agreements be sealed by 7 lords and sanctioned by the Crown." "And now," Jon turned to Corlys Velaryon, "My Lord Hand, is it your wish to bring the King's personal sanction to this council?" Velaryon's gaze met Jon's. "Yes. But we must also guard against delay. The Iron Throne's politics are as treacherous as any storm, and we cannot cede our initiative. Let us swear the council by proxy and affirm once the king arrives." Sir Otto inclined. "Then I shall record our vows and await His Grace's assent. Let the articles be read." Ben Terwire. A servant unfurled a long scroll and began to recite the articles, each clause binding the realm's fleets to joint patrols, fortifying key choke points, sharing intelligence on raiders and smugglers, and presenting a united front against any who would threaten the coasts. When the final clause, pledging mutual aid in defense of any signatory's borders, was read, Corlys Velaryon rapped his staff on the dais. "By the authority vested in me as Hand of the King and Warden of the Narrow Sea, I seal these articles of the Maritime Council." He dipped his quill in ink and signed beneath his seal. Jon rose, voice ringing. "I, Jon Snow, Lord of Winterfell and Admiral of the Wall's fleets, sign this covenant for the North. May our bonds hold against every storm." One by one, the lords and ladies at the high table dipped quill to parchment, sealing their commitments. When the last lord, the heir of Driftmark, had signed, the hall erupted in applause. Jon allowed himself a single, measured smile. "We have forged a weapon," he said, quiet but firm. "Let its edge never dull." The following day, with the articles dispatched by Raven to every holdfast in the north and beyond, Jon prepared to depart Dragonstone. Sir Otto Hightower delivered a sealed missive from King Viserys, praising the council's swift action and pledging to confirm its authority once political storms at court had abated. Though flattering, the letter's careful wording revealed more concern for protocol than praise, and Jon set it aside with a pang of impatience. "Your next summons will be to the Red Keep," Sir Otto told him, voice polite but edged with courtly caution. "We hope to see you in King's Landing within the fortnight." Jon inclined his head. "Then I will ride for the capital once my duties here conclude." He exchanged quiet words with Corlys Velaryon, promises to stand by one another, and with Sir Hightower, agreements to share intelligence. Finally, he strode from the council chamber, ghost padding behind him, and descended into Dragonstone's winding halls to prepare for the southward journey. Outside, the rain had cleared, leaving the sky a swirl of gold and gray. White Harbor's galleys waited at the quay, their hulls freshly caulked, oars aligned. Jon mounted the deck of the flagship, Ghost at his side, and watched as the ropes were cast off. The wind caught the sails, and they glided from the harbor into the open narrow sea once more. Ahead lay the slender ribbon of coast that led to King's Landing. Storm's End, Summerhall's ruins, Old Town's towers, the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, and beyond the grand city itself. As the castle's black towers faded astern, Jon allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had traveled from the Wall to Dragonstone, forging alliances no Stark before him had held. He had bound merchant fleets and naval squadrons into a unified defense, and he had won the trust of southern lords, fragile though it was. Yet the greatest trial awaited in King's Landing, where political currents ran deeper than any tide. He turned to Sir Tymet and Sir Robert. "We ride to the throne room next. Keep your blades close, your wits closer." The knights nodded, their resolve unspoken but unshakable. Ghost nosed Jon's hand as if offering counsel. Jon patted the direwolf's head. "We carry the North's honor," he said softly. "Let no man sully it." The ship pitched in a swallow, and the narrow sea's gray waters surrounded them. Ahead, White Harbor's ships squared their sails to escort them past Storm's End into Blackwater Bay. Behind them stretched the North's realm, icy bastions and snowy forest, safe for now by Jon's hand. And before them lay the courts of kings and courtiers, a new battlefield in the war to keep the realm whole. Jon Snow braced himself against the salt wind, the weight of his vows a steady anchor in his chest. He would ride south, and he would stand in councils of power, and he would not falter. For Longclaw at his hip, Ghost at his side, and the dire wolf's banner flying above his ships, the Lord of Winterfell steered his course into the shifting currents of fate, undaunted, unbowed, and ever watchful.